Welcome everyone to our Mesa City Council study session for April 2nd. Councilmember Adams will be participating by Zoom, otherwise all other council members are here. Before we get started, you may notice several of us wearing blue today. Today is the World Autism Awareness Day. We're proud that Mesa is the first ever autism certified city. This reflects our community's commitment to accessibility, awareness, and support for individuals on the autism spectrum. So we can continue that. I want to thank Visit Mesa, Mark Garcia, for leading that back in the day. Let's continue celebrating differences and creating a community that promotes understanding and acceptance for individuals on the autism spectrum. With that, item 1 is to review the agenda we have for Monday, April 6th, council meeting. So council, I know there's been some questions raised and we have all the experts in the room. Who'd like to go first? Ms. Duff.
I have a quick question. I should have asked it the other day on 5E, and we might be covering it. I had just looked at the project list, and I saw one that says Banner Gateway Improvements, and I was just wondering what that was.
On 5E?
Yeah. Let's make sure that it's still 5E, because sometimes. Yeah, and utility bonds.
Presentation on
So-
CD&E.
And where is it on the council report? It had a project list. Oh, here it is on attachment A. And it's under construction, so I guess it's good to go. It's a natural gas improvement for Banner Gateway.
They have a presentation in here.
But we have a presentation, I don't know, it's a project, it's just, I should have asked the other day and I'm like, I forgot
We're
about
probably
it.
providing gas infrastructure to the gateway. I'm assuming that's why we're doing the bond sale.
Yep. Mayor, Councilmember Duff, that's Mark Hallstrom, Assistant City Engineer. That's a small gas improvement along Gateway, by Banner Gateway, that was constructed with the Central Mesa reuse pipeline. So it was paired up with that because it was in the same area. And so the work now is complete.
Okay, so that, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't doing the improvements for private development.
It was related to a service for that area. So it was part of a typical work that the city does with our gas system.
Okay, all right. Okay,
So I think once the construction is done, we repay ourselves with the bond sale of those bonds. Is that correct? We pay
Mayor,
everything.
I would have to look into specifically this project. I have a list of projects here, but I don't have that one on my list. But what we'll typically, it depends on the situation, but we'll do upgrades based off of what the revenue is going to be from the gas customer so that we can meet their needs. But we're also looking to make sure that the utility is going to make money off of those improvements that are being put in. That's the typical process, but again, with this specific project, I don't have the details on it.
Could we ask Mark? Mark, why don't you come up and explain? You're very thorough the other day.
Oh, thank you.
Typically, and maybe I need to learn more, but typically private development pays for the installation of infrastructure that doesn't exist?
I'm sorry, Councilmember Duff, could you repeat that? So go ahead.
Is my assumption correct that on a private development, if the infrastructure doesn't exist, they pay for the improvement?
That is correct typically. So, but there are like thresholds for, private use. But this sounds like, and I'm not an expert in this specific project, but it does sound like this is general public purpose. So.
Yeah, and that it's serving more than
Correct.
that area. The intent is
Yeah, Mayor and Councilmember Duff, we do this all the time in the
Okay.
utilities. I mean, think of it as we're not providing, we're your utility owner hat in this regard. We're getting infrastructure to meet a client who's then, we're going to make more than off of serving that client than it's going to cost us to put in the infrastructure. And so that happens all the time. Scott's team evaluates that every time there's a request to provide service that we don't have an existing line, that they would evaluate that and determine whether it's good business sense in order to provide that line extension in order to serve that customer. Yeah.
And just to follow up on the mayor's comment, so when we typically do issue or have these issuances, our goal is to provide funding for the calendar year. But since we don't receive those proceeds until midway through the calendar year, we often reimburse ourselves for the 6 months of expenditures, and then the remaining funds help support the project costs through the remainder of the year. So,
Can I make sure I understand that? So we are funding it for the, for Banner, right? And then we're gonna basically pay ourselves back with the bond monies, is that right? And then they're gonna profit us more than what we would have paid in order to build that infrastructure over the long term? Or do I have that backwards?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, so I'm not specifically familiar with this project.
Yeah, this is one, and I apologize, I have a list of projects here, but this
It's
is not one that I caught. I can give you details associated with the specifics of the
I think I'm looking
project.
more for the flow of the money. Like, you
Okay.
know, we pay for it up front, we pay ourselves back with a bond, but ultimately we're profiting off of the,
Yeah, we'll issue the
revenues.
bond and put the infrastructure in up front, but then we realize we've done the evaluation that we're going to make more over time by serving that customer. That's no different
Yeah,
than
that makes
SRP or any other utility that would look at if a new neighborhood was coming online, are we going to provide power to that? And they would put in the infrastructure on the front end. That's essentially what we're doing here with this gas line. We have a willing customer that's wanting to utilize it, so we put in the infrastructure, and then we're going to make more. We're going to make a lot more than the cost to put in the infrastructure over time by providing that gas service to that customer.
but we're paying for it up front with the bond money, or we're paying it with our general funds and then reimbursing ourselves with bond monies?
Mayor,
We-
Councilmember
yeah.
Taylor would be with the operating monies from the utility fund. So
Okay,
they,
and
it
then
would
we
pay
would-
for it first, and then it'd pay for the construction, and then it would be repaid with the bond proceeds.
Okay,
But to be clear, it's not out of the general fund.
That's correct.
sorry, utility fund, yeah.
Utility fund,
Okay,
yeah.
thanks, that was the part that I was trying to catch
Yeah.
in the process. If no,
I should have brought it up in advance. This is a small question that I just made it a big question.
while we have Scott up here. So I know we spoke over email. I just wanted to make sure that for the public to understand the 1.3 million on item 5F, for going out and doing the reverse auctioning for the additional power. I just wanted to make sure that we were super clear. I read the council report on it after we emailed and discussed a little bit about it. You're basically saying we still just didn't have quite enough energy to feed our customers in the nighttime, right? That power. So we need those really weird ad hoc moments where people's air conditioning is just cranking up in the middle of the night, where they're running it colder. That's why we're going to market for this, because the solar that we're buying is not starting until, you said, what, 2027? Is that right?
2027, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so, Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, we look at, so there's seasonality to power usage. Obviously, there's more with the two utilities that I'm responsible for, there's more gas use when it's cold.
Right.
There's more electric use when it's warm. So this is summer purchases. It's off-peak, so this is the time, yes, when, folks are sleeping, but you still hear that air conditioning kicking on, because in Arizona, it's hot all through the evenings. That's one of the things that we're seeing, is those nighttime temperatures aren't dropping like they used to, and they're staying elevated. And so we consistently look at our portfolio of what the demand's going to be, what supplies do we have contracts with, in trying to make sure that we're getting those as close as we can, so that we're not out buying market purchases, trying to prevent the volatility that can be associated with the market. And then in this case, we're using the reverse auction process that we had used previously.
Which worked really well,
Right,
right?
which worked really well. And that $90 a megawatt hour limit that we set in the report is actually our cheapest contract right now for that summertime off-peak. So we're trying hard we're pretty confident that we'll get below that, The reason why we set it at that 90 is just because there is volatility within the markets, and we don't want to get to a point that if we could get $61 per megawatt energy, but council has approved us for 60, we wouldn't be able to
out on
complete
it.
the transaction.
Yeah.
We'd have to come back, and by that time, by the time we do this process again, and we go back into the market, it's, we're exposing ourselves possibly in our ratepayers.
Yeah, thank you. And just for the public to understand, this is not for all of Mesa, this is just for the 5 square miles that
This
serves
is
the
just
downtown
for
area.
the electric service area, the 5.5
Okay.
square miles.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay, we still have the agenda up. Any other questions?
I would like to have just an update on 5B on the auction.
That was an exciting auction. I was there.
Was it she?
Is selling their 10 acres, Red Berry in her district.
Again, Mayor, Councilmember Goldforth, Mark Hallstrom, Assistant City Engineer. I've got Lisa Davis with me. She's our real estate manager, and she'll be running through the presentation on the auction and the results that we received yesterday.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Yes, today we're here seeking the authorization to sell 8130 East Redberry. It's located just south of Thomas and west of Haas Road, and it's 10 acres in size. We purchased it back in 2003 for $630,000 with voter-approved bonds, and then in 2007, it was annexed into the city along with a larger portion of the city annexed in at the same time. The auction was held yesterday morning, and it was pretty exciting to watch and be a part of. The minimum bid was the $1,550,000, which was the appraised value. We had a third-party appraiser appraise the property, and that was the value of the site. Minimum bid increments were $10,000. And overall, the auction was 31 minutes long, and there was a total of 56 bids. The highest bidder was Reserve 100, and the highest bid was $2,090,001. And the reason that we had the $1 is because when they started the auction, or actually before starting the auction, they could put in a bid, and there was one bidder that put in for $1 more than the appraised value. As far as notification of the sale, we created a webpage that included all of the information about the property as well as the online auction and how it would work. So they had all of that information as well as the required training, the fact that they would need to bring in a bidder's affidavit, the check that they would have to bring in for $77,500 to be a part of the auction. We had emails that went out. There was over 2,900 emails that had signed up for interest in any city-owned property that went on the market. We had the required newspaper advertisement. The site was posted with signs, and also letters went out to property owners within 1,000 feet. 150 feet is what's required per the policy, but we went ahead and did 1,000 feet because that's what planning typically does.
Lisa, can I ask really quick?
Sure.
You said there's a total of 56 bids. How many bidders were there?
There were three. There were three registered bidders that were part of the auction
Interesting. You
yesterday.
get 2,900 emails about it?
2,900 of people that had signed up to receive information. So any city-owned property that would go on the market, these 2,900 people that had signed up for emails would be notified.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Development requirements, we had went through these back in January when I came forward asking for the requirement of the online auction. This development requirements includes the half-street improvements for Redberry, drainage requirements, which is a kind of a big deal in this area. They have to comply with the 2050 general plan. They can use septic system with a development agreement. We have a development agreement that's part of this cell. And then also they would have to comply with the desert uplands. In this slide, we do have a potential layout that the city developed. We hired an engineering firm and they created this 8-lot layout of what it could potentially be. We didn't include any like engineering or anything like that. It was just a layout. Current zoning in the area, just wanted to show a lot of residential, of course. Our site here is here, of course, in the red. And the area that you see around it in the gray is still in the county, so it hasn't been annexed into the city. So all of the zoning that you see in the yellow is in the city. So again, we're here to obtain the authorization to sell the property and also for the city manager to sign any purchase agreements as well as a development agreement. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I have a quick question. So if we, authorization's done and the city manager can sign all the purchase agreements, we are honoring that $2 million bid, right? We would be going to that entity and saying, hey, you offered to purchase this. Can they still back out of that?
Mayor Freeman, Councilmember Taylor, they're definitely very anxious to get this under contract. They've been in contact with me. They're ready to sign the purchase agreement. And we do have the original check that they've given us, which will also go into escrow immediately. Plus, they have to come up with the additional funds to create the minimum 10%, which is $209,000. So they would have to add to that $77,000 check to start escrow. But they're definitely very, very eager to get this purchased.
So Lisa, they're very interested. You don't think this would be a problem, but in the event that the
Yes.
top bidder walked away, you would be able to go to the next highest bidder? Is that the way?
That's correct. We can definitely go to that second bidder if for some reason that they decided they didn't want to buy the property.
So the property was purchased by bond money. Will that money then go back to that bond money that was purchased with? And, because I think that money has to go back into the bond. Is that?
It was
which that
purchased
parks
in
or-
order back in '03, right, Lisa, for eventual park space. Now, at the time, I think that was just throwing a dart at a map and trying to maybe decide, because that area was certainly very different in 2003 than it is now. As Parks determined that that wouldn't be an ideal location for that, that led to the sale. But I think the intent is to reinvest those funds back up into parks in Northeast Mesa, because just because it's not in that particular site, there are definitely, we have other park sites adjacent to that, northeast of the 202, that would, certainly benefit from those park funds being invested in that. So we'll work with Councilmember
Yes.
Goforth
Yeah.
and.
I've already suggested that the money should stay with, because,
Yeah,
when you go
right.
out to bond and you say there's going to be a park in that area, the money should stay in that category in that area.
Correct, and there's complete alignment on that philosophy. So we'll work with parks and determine which of those parks in the adjacent area would make the most sense and what type of improvements we could do for that amount of money.
Okay, just confirming that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other part is the Reserve 100 is Blandford Homes, so they have good experience in building out in that area.
Yes,
So I'm fully confident that they understand what they got into.
for sure.
I have one question. So
Yes, Duff.
I understand returning the $630,000 that was expended for the property to parks in that area. How about the 1.4 million in access? Where does those revenues go?
Mayor, Councilmember Duff, I think what we do, we work with parks and look at the parks master plan in that area. Unfortunately, 2 million doesn't get you very far when you're talking about park improvements. And so I think there's ample need in that area that would utilize the full amount of funds. But you're right, at a minimum, we would, of course, reinvest the 600,000 in that area. But I'm sure as we look at the needs and what the different options are on those adjacent existing parks for improvements in there, it's probably going to run close to that range.
Okay, so it would stay in the area
It
in
would stay.
parks?
It would stay in
Okay.
the area in parks.
Okay.
Is the initial thinking.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, obviously, the cost in 2003 and now 2026, I think you more look at the project than the dollars. But so Lisa, remind me, was this our first online auction?
Second.
Mayor
Second,
Freeman,
okay.
Councilmember Goforth, actually our third. We held two back in 2020, so it's been 5.5 years since the last two that we held. We held one for the Adobe Wrecker property, which was just over 2 acres. It sold for the appraised value. And then the second one we did was the one at 202 on Thomas, which was 13 acres grove property.
And did that sell for the appraised value or?
No, that sold above the appraised value. I believe the appraised value on that one was 950,000 and it sold for 1.7 million.
Oh,
That was 13 acres.
okay. Well, this seems like it was a success. I'm glad to see that it approved over the appraised value. So any hiccups, or would you say that this went pretty smoothly? And
I think it went very smoothly. It was very, using Easy Buy, they were great. They definitely knew what they were doing. We watched it from kind of the back side of it, not on the same side that the online auction users were using it, but I think it went really well. You could definitely see a lull during that 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden somebody would bid, and then it would start going up again. So it was interesting. I thought it went really well. Very easy, very simple to use, I think. And it was nice to see the 3 bidders, and all 3 took part in the auction, so it worked well.
well, great. I'm happy that it sold for over appraised value because it's a great area and a lot of potential and opportunities. So.
Yeah, me too.
You have something?
Yeah, the bond question, do you know any GO bonds, parks or otherwise, pre-2008 still outstanding, or have these bonds all been paid off or refinanced?
Again, Mark Hughes, City Treasurer. I should have introduced myself before, but yes, we do still have some outstanding pre-2008.
Okay. Have we looked at refinancing some of those?
We look at refinancing every year.
And
Utility,
the rate we
GO.
have on those bonds still doesn't, we still don't, can't get a better deal on some of those.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, that is correct.
Okay.
It's a very low rate on, especially particularly on the GO bonds we have.
Okay. Yeah, so I think what I would like to talk about, Mayor, when we have an opportunity, I think there's a presentation on 5D, and there's some information in there I think we're going to want to talk about. So if we can get a presentation when questions are done on this.
We'll have a follow-up question. When Lisa and Lance were here last, we encouraged them to find additional parcels that we could sell, that we get them back into the system. If we don't need these parcels, let's get them back out in the private industry and have them developed. And then there's, a revenue stream, not only for us, but for them as well. Have you found some, Lisa? I'm sure you're looking.
I don't want to answer that question. I'm going to let Mr. Butler answer that question.
Well, amen, Mayor.
That's all I need.
Yeah, if.
We'll all say amen and move on.
Exactly. I mean, this is a perfect example. I mean, this was, I don't think anyone here can speak to the exact rationale back in '03 for this particular site. I'm sure there was one at the time, but that moment passed and we didn't need it. And this is a great area for residential development. So being able to turn it back over to the private sector so they can develop that makes a lot of sense. And certainly as we come across other parcels like that, if they are, sometimes it's been in our, we've wanted to maintain control of a property just because of the unknown of whether we might need something down the road. But on something like this, where clearly the decision had been made that this was not the ideal site for a park, we needed to get that back out into the system. So,
Okay,
yeah.
great. All right, Vice Mayor, you had any question on this item?
No, I think we're done.
Did you want 5D?
D.
So, Mark, you're back up, I think. 5D, Mark, Lisa, thank you. Mark, Lisa. Okay. Back to Mark.
And I'll just cue you up. I think slide 6 is your highlight.
Okay.
There's another one. I'll find it. Slide 10.
You want me to go ahead to there right now, Vice Mayor?
You could do a little lead in and move fast that way.
Okay, sounds good.
Short.
All right, well, good morning, Mayor and Council. Once again, I'm Mark Hughes, City Treasurer, and I'm here to present the 2026 financing plan. And to help answer questions behind me, we also have the city's municipal advisor, Janelle Gold from Hilltop Securities, and we have the city's bond and special counsel, Zach Shakis from Greenberg Troweg. So I'll go quickly through these. So I'll start with some quick background information. So the city's financing plan is the city's plan to obtain funding for projects by issuing bonds and obligations. And some of the key benefits to financing that we've identified over the years are listed below. First and foremost, the issuances we'll talk about today are tax exempt, which means the interest rates are lower. Secondly, financing helps accelerate project delivery, which aids in mitigating some of the inflationary pressures. And third, it also allows us to spread the costs over the useful life of the project, so the residents are paying for the projects while they're benefiting from them. And then lastly, financing assists in smooth rate adjustments because we are able to structure the repayment of the bonds and obligations to help create stable payments for the residents. And I'll show some examples of this here in a few minutes. All right, so this is an overview of the financing process. Each year, the city prepares the capital improvement program where it evaluates the needs of the residents, prioritizes projects, and determines the funding source for those projects. The funding sources for those projects can be using existing operating cash, through financing, or a combination of the two. If the projects are to be funded by general obligation bonds, the city would then hold a bond election or use remaining authorization to issue those general obligation bonds. And then the last step would be we would access the financial markets to seek out those investors. Okay, so these are some of the things we do to manage our long-term obligations. So as I mentioned before, they are tax-exempt issuances we're talking about today, and we do structure the repayment of those bonds and obligations. They also have a max maturity of 25 years and a 10-year refinance call, which gives us the option to refinance them in 10 years. This year, we do have an opportunity to refinance older utility bonds, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But first, I wanted to highlight some of the differences between the two issuances. All right, so first we'll look at general obligation bonds, which are voter approved for a specific purpose, and they are repaid with secondary property taxes. And the second are the utility system revenue obligations, which are a contractual obligation and repaid with utility revenues. Okay, so this is the first item we're proposing today, which is to refinance previously issued utility bonds at a lower interest rate. The top part of this slide does show the city's financial policy, which states that when we refinance, the net present value of savings must exceed 3% of the debt service amount being replaced. So at the bottom of the slide, you can see that we are looking to refinance approximately $225 million of utility bonds that were previously issued between 2013 and 2016. If we do the refinancing, it would provide an estimated savings of $13.6 million, which would be spread out over several fiscal years. And the net present value savings that we would achieve would be that 4.2%. And the last thing I did want to point out on this is that whenever we do refinance, we do not extend the final maturity of those bonds. So if there's 12 or 13 years left on the bonds or obligations, when we refinance, that remains the same. So we're not extending the debt further out, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that, because I think that's an important point. We've saved $13.6 million by refinancing. That was my question earlier on the GO obligations. And we've also made sure that that debt has stayed intact with a number of years. So we're not going to pay more in interest because we've kicked the can down the road. This is a good one. Thank you.
And Mayor, Vice Mayor, that's correct. That's important to the city. So. Okay, so so that was the first item we're proposing. The second item is an issuance of general obligation bonds, which includes funding for parks, public safety, and transportation with target proceeds of $61 million. It does include using bond authorizations from the past 3 bond elections we've held, so 2020, 2022, and 2024. And after this issuance, there would still be remaining authorizations on each of those elections, on each of those authorizations, and that information is included in the council report, so the breakout. So.
Mark, when you say there's remaining authorizations, you mean there's just remaining funds that were approved in those years' bonds that we're not asking to use, is that correct?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, that's correct. So they would be used in future
Yeah.
bond issuances.
Got it.
Okay, so here are just some examples of projects to be funded with the new proposed general obligation bonds. There are, of course, a couple fire stations. There's some renovations to the IDEA Museum. There's police headquarters, Signal Butte Park Phase 2, and various transportation projects such as, the big ones, the Broadway Road improvements. So these are just some examples, but there's also the project list that's attached. So.
Mark, could you maybe talk just briefly, and maybe Mike can help you, just about our philosophy on bonding, that we don't want to bond every year or every 2 years for the same category, that we like to spread it out. We may bond every 2 years, but we're not bonding for the same sort of projects. Maybe 1 year's public safety, the next year. Can you just talk about that a little bit? And we don't go out and get an extremely large amount that satisfies us for numerous years. We like to do smaller increments more often.
Mayor and Councilmember Goforth, thank you. Mike Kennington, Deputy City Manager, CFO. Yes, we typically when we go to the voters, we have a plan of 4 to 5 years, 6 years of bond projects that we want to do. For example, in 2020 was the last time we went for a transportation bond package. And we have these long list of projects that we've spent a lot of staff time putting together so that we can go to the voters and we can have this package for the next couple of years. And so every year we do the projects that we can do and we finance them through Mark. Mark and his team and Irma finance on a yearly basis, try to minimize the interest costs because we don't want to issue that entire bond package right away because then we'd incur interest while the bond projects haven't been done, right? So he looks at what we've spent the last 6 months, and then he looks forward to this next 6 months, what we're going to spend, and that's how he determines how much we're going to issue. So we don't want to go to the electors, the voters every year because that would cost a lot of staff time and money. That's why we typically try to go in those 4 or 5 years of bond elections for those type of bond projects.
Mayor and Councilmember Goforth, I'd say maybe the one exception to that is public safety. We do go more consistently on public safety just because it's more dynamic in some of the needs that we see, so we want to stay a little bit more flexible. So you'll see a more consistent cadence as it relates to public safety bonds. But as Mike said, when we look at parks bonds or transportation bonds, we try to have a 4 to 6 year gap between that. And along with that philosophy too, you see other communities that just have a different view on this. They take really large bond packages, maybe once every 8 to 10 years, and then it's got a really large price tag. But then they say, okay, well this is going to carry us out over several years. Whereas we've tried. We know, obviously, we see how flexible we need to be sometimes on these projects, and things change. And so our philosophy has been go to the voters with smaller issuances more often, because then we can really be more precise on the projects. Because if you were giving me authorization today about a project that's needed 10 years from now, that would be really hard to, the price tag and just also the need or the location. So we might not be able to be as precise as we'd like to be. We have flexibility in these projects within the categories, but we try to be as upfront with the voters that this is what you're going to get for this bond project. And that's harder in other communities when you do these really large, decade-long issuances.
Yeah, and I tend to support that. I mean, I think smaller, incremental, more flexibility is the better option, and it's served us well. I think it's important that residents do understand when you issue it in 2020, that doesn't mean you build it in 2020. That doesn't even mean, you authorize it in 2010. It doesn't even mean you issue it in 2020. Our plan is 5 to 6 years long. So I think that gets confusing because sometimes, for example, in 2020, we said, will you authorize a bond for this project? And they haven't seen the project for several years, but it's not. And I know that during COVID, it extended that period of time of being able to build out those projects and use those bond proceeds. We're more in a 5 to 6 instead of 7 to 8 timeframe of getting things completed. So, but I think it's important that people understand it doesn't happen right away, and that we ask for smaller amounts more often for that flexibility and more precise on the price tag and things like that.
Yeah, and you're right, Mayor and Councilmember, there's a lot of factors that go into a street project, for example. I mean, we may need to time that up because there's going to be construction happening on an adjacent arterial, and we don't want to have both under construction, but we know we need the authority to do that. So we'll seek the approval of that and then time it out to meet the needs of that area. And so there's a lot of factors, as you indicated, about the timing of that. I know when it's something that's highly desirable, if it's a park or something like that, people want it yesterday. The vice mayor dealt with that with the library, right? With people wanting the library, the next day to be constructed.
Right.
But it takes some time, and you're right. That's one of the parts. People are like, well, I voted for it. Why aren't we turning dirt? But we do try to do everything we can to keep that time frame as short as possible.
And this is something that has been the philosophy of the city under leadership of former city manager for some time, but I don't know how long, because we have outliers like Redberry, like the Thomas and 202, where we did go out and bond, we purchased land, and the project never got built. Right. That is an outlier. That is not what we intend to do, and certainly not under
Yeah, especially
your
over such a
leadership
long
or
period of
ours.
time. And sometimes, there's different philosophies that the council may bring of a particular project might have been authorized by, a previous council, and then the needs have shifted within the community. But we try to come back and have that discussion here to say, well, it's going to remain in the same category, but maybe instead of this facility, it'll be these facilities instead. And so, but we certainly don't like it to be a 23-year gap between that period of time. So,
Thanks, Mike.
No, when you look at the project list,
You might just stay there, Mike.
actually, I do have a question for Mike.
It's better to have them both there.
yeah.
Well, the bike trail that's in the photo here, I think was part of a 2018 bond funding. Same with, the library, I think, was also 2018. So it does take a number of years, but it also depends on where on the list it is. The fire station 224 was just a recent bond, and it's the first one to go up. Sorry, Rich, I got mine first. But it's just where it ends up. Mike, would you just tell us a little bit about what some projects, we're going to bond some of these projects versus paying cash?
Yeah, so I think so we've always had the philosophy, and this kind of is the debt kind of philosophy, where if it's an asset that the public uses, we want them to pay for it, right? And we want to match that usage of that asset with the payment of it. And so oftentimes we have these large projects that we want to complete as a community, and so we put them on bond and have the users of that asset pay for those through the debt service payment. And so that's kind of the philosophy we've had here at the City of Mesa.
Okay, so essentially, if somebody has a house today and we paid cash, they paid through their taxes for that item. If they move next year, then the person that moves in is the one that's going to benefit from that system that's already paid for.
Correct.
Whereas by bonding it,
Right.
then the debt moves to whoever is owning the house. You could sell it 4 different times. Whoever's using it is going to be the one paying for that asset. All right, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Ms. Taylor, did you push?
Don't worry, I only have a few questions. Is there an expiration date on bonds for monies that have been voter approved, but they've not been issued yet?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, no, the authorizations remain.
They just stay open?
They stay open, that's correct.
Okay. Do you know how many years back we have bonds that haven't been allocated to their intended projects?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, I believe there may be some from the 80s.
The 80s.
That haven't been used. Is that correct, Mike?
I know of a 1994 authorization.
Okay, that's
I'm
probably.
not sure about the 80s.
Okay. 1994.
Just one?
I think it was a solid waste authorization, so that's what I'm aware of.
Okay. So we don't have a lot of projects that the voters have said, oh yeah, you said you were going to do that, and now you're not doing it, but the money is just kind of like waiting to be issued.
Correct.
Okay. So also just to clarify for the public, when the project has not started, the money hasn't been issued. So the public is not paying for a project that was never even started.
Correct.
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, if the authorization's not used, there's no bonds being issued, so there's no debt service being paid by the residents. That's
Okay.
correct.
Are we currently delayed on projects that we do know are going to happen? We do have them prioritized, but they've just been pushed out quite a bit longer. So do we have an idea of as a city, our goal to execute on those projects? Like we're looking at tightening timelines down?
Yeah, I think in that case, it's more of a CIP discussion, I guess, but every project may have different variables and different reasons why they may be postponed or whatnot. And some we actually try to bring forward faster, maybe cost are cheaper. I think the Signal Butte, and Mark could correct me if I'm wrong,
That's a good
was
key.
brought forward, was faster.
So would you say it's correct that sometimes we delay a project because it's actually cheaper? We can forecast that it might be less expensive to execute on that, so the bond monies we get a lower interest rate?
I guess I would have to answer that with, there's a lot of factors in each project. I guess it would
Loaded
depend on it would depend on the project.
We call that a potato. Okay.
I'll just add though to that, Mayor and Councilmember, you're right though. Our goal is to get these out the door as quickly as possible, and then we run into it. Scott, the Vice Mayor alluded to this a moment ago about the fire station in Councilmember Adams' district. We ran into some unforeseen challenges dealing with archaeological findings on the
Right.
site that have led to some delay in the timeline, and so that was something that if we would have, the Vice Mayor and Councilmember Adams, I know we're fighting over who was going to get to cut the ribbon first of their station, and so unfortunately something that should have been on the same time frame as Station 224 is now delayed. Hopefully we'll be moving forward very soon on that after we deal with some of the remediation on the site. But those are some of the unforeseen things that we run into. But the intent was to get that moving very quickly after the voters approved it. And all of our projects is truly the intent, unless there's
I've
a
got
phasing.
the dog park.
Yeah.
From 2018.
Yeah.
People are still asking.
Right, for Sunnyside, for
Countryside
the Countryside Dog Park. We hear you.
Okay.
Well, council member, just in retrospect, 223, the fire station was supposed to be built when I was a council member. So that's been a few years back.
And he's grown up to be mayor now.
Second
Oh,
of
look at
all,
you.
the Central Mesa reuse pipeline is a good example of something being delayed because of circumstances out of our control, and consequently cost us twice as much as what it was originally scheduled for. So we had initially, I know back in the day, it was about 90 million, maybe 100. I think we finished it up over 200 and something million dollars for that pipeline.
Yeah, there's pre-COVID and post-COVID
Yeah.
pricing, yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Timing is so critical on a lot of these projects, and
You
when-
lead to my next question, though. That's really good. When we're prioritizing, do we consider the cost to the general public if we move projects up? So let's say we approve the projects on this list, but then we've got bonds that haven't been issued from the past, and we say, hey, it's time to shift this project up. Now, we're asking for those monies to be drawn down. So are we considering stacking all of those costs and what that costs to the general public? Do we look at those things very carefully?
Yeah, definitely. We look at costs all the time, and if it's advantageous to move a project, we look at that and consider that as well.
Okay. Because I know people will say, hey, you approved these 10 projects, but now it looks like 20 are getting executed on, which, some people will be really excited about, but with that comes a new cost to the taxpayer.
Absolutely. We're very conscious about, as we look at structuring the debt, about what that actual impact is on the ratepayer. And so we take that into consideration, that for the example you gave, that we wouldn't push so many through at one time that it would greatly
Burden them.
accelerate, burden
For sure.
their
Yeah, that's
property
my
And I
taxes.
just
concern
want to
is it's like,
remind you,
oh,
since
here's
I've been on
too
council,
much.
we have lowered the tax rate. So to pay the levies. And and held it steady, lowered it and then have held it steady, so.
Yeah, so that's been the great thing. As we've brought new debt online, we've retired debt so that we've been able to maintain or stay within a reasonable amount. There's been, some fluctuations, but you're right. That's the idea is to keep it as steady as possible for the taxpayer. So we'll look at what debt's being retired and then what we're going to issue and try to keep that as balanced as possible for the ratepayer.
And for the 61 million that you're requesting, is this a combination of bonds and cash from our funds, or is this all just going to be completely bonded? Are we mixing money?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, this would be new money, so this would be new bonds being issued. So
Okay.
it would be excluding the cash.
Okay, so we're not using our revenue as a city to help pay for anything. Is that right?
Any of these projects, we
Yeah.
could, right? I mean.
But the proposal is just to use,
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, we are using cash, but in this case, when he's asking for the financing of it, it's just bonds for this ask.
but to pay for all the projects.
For all the projects, we do have cash fund.
So we're using both. We're using
Yeah,
cash
we're
funds
using
and
both.
bonds. Okay,
Yeah,
that's what-
yes.
Okay. Thanks. I know I have a lot of questions.
Do you want to move to slide 9? Mark, you want to share that graph with us?
Sure, yes, Mayor. So this is a good segue because this shows the stable payments that Council was just talking about. So this slide is the chart of total GO payments. It includes what's currently outstanding plus the addition of the proposal. And you can see annual payments would increase slightly next fiscal year, remain relatively flat, and then decline further out on the chart. So that shows kind of the stable payments that we were just talking about a minute ago. So.
Can I just kind of mention on this graph, it looks like, we're going to be paying more, but not necessarily, because our city has been growing so much with residential and commercial that we're spreading the peanut butter a lot thinner. So this is how we've been able to lower the rate, secondary property tax rate after years, is through growth and not, even though we're taking on more debt at the time, we have more growth. And like fire stations and many other things, we have to provide these capital assets in order to service that growth. So we have to take growth into the equation on how the amounts are smoothed out.
Good point. Thank you. Continue, Mark.
So this is the third item we're proposing, which is an issuance of utility obligations. Total proceeds would be $341 million and would be split between providing funding for capacity fee related projects and non-capacity fee related projects. So 179 million would be going towards non-capacity fee related projects, and 162 million would be going towards growth projects related to capacity fee revenue.
And the capacity fee is the item we passed just within about a month ago, I think.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, that's correct.
So 47.5% of the bonds in this picture here are going to be paid by that capacity fee, whereby had we not passed that, it would have been borne by all the utility ratepayers.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, that's correct.
Thank you.
And these get paid back, the obligations get paid back through the utility revenues, right? Not,
Mayor, Vice Mayor,
not
yes.
the tax levy, not the tax
Not the
secondary property.
Not the general obligation.
Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, that's correct. So this would not be through the secondary property tax levy. This would be through the utility revenues, which includes the capacity fee revenues. So,
And can you just give us a couple of examples of the projects? I know they're buried here in the report. Not intentionally, but there's a lot of documents. But if you could just kind of highlight a couple.
Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, absolutely. So on the next slide, this shows a couple examples. So the smart metering, or AMI, that's a non-capacity fee related project, but the big capacity fee related project that's being funded would be the Signal Butte Water Treatment Plant expansion. The Central Mesa Reuse Pipeline, it is complete, but as we discussed earlier, when we look to issue the bonds, we do reimburse ourselves for 6 months of expenses that we've incurred earlier in the year. So we would be using some of the proceeds for the Central Mesa Reuse Pipeline. And then there are some natural gas improvements, natural gas system improvements, such as Gansell Road, which is an example of a project being funded with the new utility obligations.
I just want to recognize Mr. Adams had to drop off from the call. He'll be back if he can. Thank you. Continue, Mark. Is that it?
It's getting close, Mayor.
Okay.
All right, so similar to the GEO financing payments, this chart shows the total utility financing payments, which would be paid for by the ratepayers and the new capacity fee revenue. It includes all outstanding payments plus what's being proposed. Once again, you can see total payments would increase next fiscal year, remain relatively flat, and then decrease further out on that. So. All right, and then lastly, this is the timeline we're looking at. So that this would go to council on Monday. Then subject to market conditions, we would look to sell and receive the proceeds on those timeframes listed below. There are some date ranges listed on this slide, and that's because we have to allow, for IRS tax purposes, we have to separate them by 15 days. And we do have 3 issuances. And then also the window provides us an opportunity to look for some favorable pricing in the market. So with that, we'll be happy to answer any other questions.
So, Mayor, just to summarize again, some of you are very familiar with this, but that we come every year with this so that we can time the issuance of issuing the debt to coincide when the projects are actually ready to be constructed. And then coinciding with that, we always look for the restructuring opportunities. And so this time we'll save $13 million, save the taxpayers $13 million by restructuring this debt. And every year we'll continue to look at that to see if we can come back with better rates for council to consider. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mike.
I have a really
have a
big,
question.
basic question, like just general public question. Hey, it's Mesa. We make a lot of revenue as a city, right? So, and it's great because people pay taxes. I know they don't pay food tax, et cetera, and they pay their utilities, and we have various ways that we fund the city, but we're growing. Do we make enough money as a city to fund some of these projects to do the cash payments where we wouldn't have to take out bonds in the future? And what would that look like? Would we be cutting our project list in half, 2/3? Just, I want people from the public who have asked me these questions, don't we make enough money to fund these projects? Why do we have to go out and take out bonds?
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, I guess I would say some of these projects that are very important are very costly. I think the mayor mentioned the reuse pipeline and over $200 million, right? And so that would be a large project to have to save over time. As Vice Mayor Summers said, we would take several years to put that cash away and pay for it up front with cash, and then the users that may not have paid for it would get to enjoy it, right? So it depends on the project. If it's a smaller project, then there's obviously opportunity, but the large, important projects typically are expensive enough that we would bond for them.
And Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, if I could expand on that too, if you look through the CIP, we pay cash for a lot of infrastructure projects. We do try to look at these projects that are generational type projects that with a lifespan of a couple of decades or more, and then that goes to the Vice Mayor's comment about the philosophy has been then just not borne by whoever happens to own that home or business that day. It would be the user of that infrastructure over the lifespan of that infrastructure, and that's been the philosophy of why we bonded out.
It might be helpful and you don't have to provide this right now, but maybe for the meeting on Monday, having an idea so I can share with people, this is about how much money our city makes, we profit, but it costs a lot of money to run a city the size of Mesa. It's very expensive, and there is not necessarily always as much left over as what people might think there is. So in order for us to do some of the larger infrastructure projects, this is how we tackle some of those and advance in. As Jen says, as we grow, we spread it thinner. I know some people will agree and disagree with the philosophy of giving that use, paying it forward to the next user instead of having the current users of said thing pay the lump sum of it. But I think it would just be helpful for the public to see, this is about how much we make, but this is how much we spend on our projects to keep it moving and flowing and growing. Me too, I mean, just as a resident.
Sure, and Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, I think that'll be a good lead in to when we talk about the budget here and after we finish the agenda review, because if there's any perceptions that we make profit into the general fund, I'd love to dispel that notion. The utilities, intentionally, as a utility, we see profits in that, but not in our general fund and general spending. We only raise revenue enough to cover our expenses, and so we'll talk about that as Brian gives his presentation. But yeah, I would love to dispel the notion that we're just raising profit on this side and sitting on that, because that's certainly not the case. Yeah.
I think that is a common belief amongst the general public, and it's because it's a complicated budget.
Sure, it is. It's,
So
yeah.
to have them have a better understanding of that would be helpful, and just to keep that kind of in the forefront of our minds.
Absolutely.
I think I would use the word revenue that we receive instead of profit. I mean, we're not in it for profit. The revenues we receive, we're very financially conservative because we take those monies and we invest them. Mark, that's your job, to invest monies that the city has, the interest that we receive, all that money's earmarked for projects in our community, from public safety all the way through all our different departments. So yes, you might pay a little bit more of this and that, but it covers our utility revenue bonds, our general obligation bonds, our secondary property taxes. We try to keep everything low. So, the perception is we're not in it for money. That's why Mesa is a great place to live. In fact, we're the best run city in Arizona, in fact, and nationally too, so from the financial part of it. So with that, anything else you want to finish, Ms. Duff? Yeah, why don't we let Mark and Mike finish? He's so close.
I'm so close, I am done.
That's what you think.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mark and Mike.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
For them or in general?
Well, I do
Yeah,
have
just-
one for them. So,
Wait, Ms. Duff, go back to that slide. That's one that's very, very important. Will you explain that? Because we have a constitutional spending limit set by the state based on our assets, and we're at 18% used. And where do we rank in that?
So Mayor, just to give some background information, each year the state puts out a report of indebtedness, and which includes as you mentioned, the debt subject to the constitutional limit and how much capacity is being used by each city and town. So as you can see, it does say pending for fiscal year 25 because they haven't put out that report yet. But we did calculate the fiscal year 25 amount internally using the consistent methodology that the state used in 24. And we, as you can see, we are using 18%. So we don't know how we compare to other cities and towns because that report for fiscal year 25 is not made public yet. But I can say for fiscal year 24, that is public, and I think we were about 10th.
Yeah.
We were about 10th for city. We were right in the middle of cities and towns in Arizona, so.
Okay, great.
Is that both percentages, 20% and the other one?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, it's 20% and 6%. So you are correct. So we do combine it, which is consistent with the report.
And for the public, what is the 6 and 20% difference? What are they used for? Because they're used for different things.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, so the 6% is just for like general government, which we would typically include like the library geo debt in, and then the 20%'s kind of for everything else, so public safety, utilities, geo debt and such. So.
And so I'm looking at this right. So in 2024, it was 13%, and now we're going up to 18%.
Mayor,
So-
Councilmember Goforth, that's correct. Last year, we did have a larger geo issuance, particularly because of public safety, so.
Okay. So what's the forecast? Where do we want to be? Are we trying to bring that down maybe after? I mean, I know it's going to go up and down, right? Because if you have a big project, that's going to go up, and then you're going to extinguish some debt, it's going to go down. So, but is there a point that we try to sort of sit at that we don't want to go
Mayor
above.
and Councilmember and Mike, please jump in on this. Really, this is to show you, to represent the fact that we're nowhere near
Yeah.
our capacity on this. And you're right, you called it, that's going to fluctuate a lot depending on the issuance. So it goes back again to our North Star about trying to keep those rates more consistent to the taxpayer. And so it'll all go back to what we issue and how we issue it more than that percentage. But we just want to show you we're nowhere near what we're statutorily authorized to be able to issue. So we are still very low on our capacity, but we know to the taxpayer it's going to be what do they get from their bill. They don't care. We care what that number is, and that's a great number to show. But at the end of the day, it's what's on your tax bill, and that's what we try to make sure that we're being more consistent on and to keep it low.
True, and let's clarify, the 20% and the 6%, this is not 18% of 26%.
No.
So this.
This is 18% of the capacity that we can reach, the max. And,
Out of 100.
yeah, and let me add on to what City Manager Butler said. The denominator in this ratio is the assessed value, right? And so to Councilmember Duff's point, as we grow as a city and we continue to add assessed value in the city, obviously that number, the ratio will go down because the denominator will go up. So it's a combination of the debt we have and the projects that we have, but also the assessed value in the denominator.
Yeah. But I think, just looking long-term, my own, we don't want to see that per capita debt, because sometimes that gets calculated, continue to trend upwards, right? I mean, we do have projects we have to do, but the goal is to, and I know it affects the pocketbook, but we also, on a macro scale, don't want to see that per capita debt
Correct.
continue to rise.
And this is another variable that Brian and his team look at when they look at the average homeowner, right? The secondary property tax and that impact to the citizen.
You're saying in light of the total amount, like, just because the assessed value is going up doesn't mean you want to see per capita.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mayor,
Okay,
may I ask a question?
Jen, the floor is yours.
Okay.
you may.
Okay, so we have, as we were talking about, there's unissued bonds that were approved that we haven't utilized. So are those factored into our finances? Does it show on us, what do you call it, position statement, or what I would call as a business owner, a balance sheet? Does it affect our bond rating? Does it play in? Because it's not going to really go into our finances until it's exercised, but I don't know how that all works.
Mayor, Councilmember Duff, it's definitely a factor of a piece of information that the rating agency asks for and that they look at. It's included in our offering statements as well. And for them, I would imagine they want to see, how much more financing we could do without going to the voters. And so that's a factor, a piece of information they have that they use.
Okay, all right. And then I'll just make one quick comment about, we run a balanced budget. Every dollar that we have is obligated, assigned to some use, and we estimate our budget. So I don't know if people think we have some kind of profit. We might have something, a better year than we estimated, and we can use those funds going forward. That's how we get our reserve funds. But we don't make a profit as a city. We are not designed to do that. And as far as paying cash for the capital improvement projects we have, is one thing is we have a long list of improvements that we need to make and we never get to. And it gets to the point we're kind of strained, especially right now, on things that we need to do, and we keep on delaying, and the infrastructure is aging, or we need additional infrastructure. So we run that tension and never being able to really kite, especially when it gets to utilities and such. There's a tension, or public safety, of accommodating our city and having these projects constantly on the back burner. So if we use a bunch of cash up front, we're really doing some detriment to what all the other things that we need to do. And Gilbert is a great example where they didn't do anything for a long time, and then they decided to pay cash for a majority of their utility infrastructure that they needed, and their rates have gone up huge. I'm glad I'm not a resident of Gilbert, because for your utility infrastructure, your water costs to go up 60% over 2 years or whatever it is, that's hard. Families can't deal with that. It's hard enough, just getting through life, let alone having those kinds of increases. It's very dangerous to, just delay and then try to cash it out and then have double-digit increases in excess of 50%. So it's something I really don't believe in. We need that steady, streamlined, predictable rates in how we use our money. Thanks.
I'll just add, the very building we're sitting in today was paid for by cash.
Right.
There's no indebtedness to this building here. So that's one thing, Mr. Brady, back when we decided to do this building, was funded that way. All right, gentlemen, you're done. Maybe. I would just like 5A, I know, Ms. Taylor, you asked me about 5A, that's the Mesa Town Center Improvement District. Do you have a question? We have DMA here. We have on the Improvement District, why we pay our assessments for that. Maybe Jeff and Jimmy, why don't you come up and just give us a high-level overview of why we participate in our Mesa Town Center Improvement District.
Thank you. I was reading over, the council document. Okay, that makes sense. Wait, so are we an assessor, almost like a county assessor, but at the city level, and we assess your property and say this is how much we value it at? Also, just for the public, I was thinking, how do I explain this in a way it makes sense?
Thank you, Zach.
Sure.
And your team. You're free to lead.
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, I'll try to give a really quick overview. This goes back to 1985 when the property owners of downtown Mesa chose themselves to self-assess to create an enhanced municipal services district. So essentially, that the assessments that they provide are assessed by the city. The city council votes on it annually, and then we transmit that additional tax assessment to the county. The county applies it to the tax bill, provides it to the city, and then the city acts as a pass-through through our contract with DMA to provide that assessed funds to DMA for the purposes of that enhanced municipal services. So what those pay for, and Jimmy will do a better job of describing the actual efforts that they do, but it's really for the clean and safe team. So enhanced cleaning, enhanced pedestrian experience or public experience. It's marketing, it's event production. So it's the things that help make downtown a more active and vibrant place. And Jimmy, maybe if you could just kind of jump in and
So Jimmy, before you do that though, I just want to stress that again, this is a special taxing district authorized under state statute that the actual property owners themselves voted to form. So that just wanted to stress that part.
And downtown Mesa is its own entity, is not a city entity. This is like an HOA, and lack of a better explanation. So it is not a city structure. Is it a separate business?
Yeah, so DMA, we're a 501c6 nonprofit. We also have a C3 arm to help us with the events so we can get sponsorship for that. But yeah, the assessment money specifically goes mainly to the Clean and Safe program, making sure that, they're cleaning out, whether it's a homeless encampment, cleaning up the trash cans on the street, emptying out all the trash, walking around, making sure leaves are collected. And then the remainder of that goes to all the programming we do to try to drive more activity to downtown, whether that's new businesses, the public coming down for events, or just on a daily basis. That's the basis of what we do, so.
And Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, we will be prepared at the public hearing on May 18th to actually provide a kind of an annual overview of DMA and their activities.
Might come just to learn. It's kind of cool.
Well, you will be conducting our public hearing for us, so.
I'll be there. It might just be Jen.
So I hope you're able to attend.
Thanks.
I think there's
I'm
a
so
couple.
glad I'm invited.
A couple important things to note is that the city is the largest landowner in downtown Mesa.
Okay.
And as a municipality, we are not subject to this property assessment. So this does include a voluntary assessment by the city on a cost per square foot of the land owned by the city that gives, because we own so much land and we own so much public realm, we get the same services from DMA as the property owners that are assessing themselves. So just to be essentially a team player with the property owners in downtown, we have a self-assessment. It's significantly lower, it doesn't follow the same formula. It's, I think, of 1.5 cents or 1.75 cents per square foot. The methodology and how we calculate the assessments for property owners is considered by the council every 5 years as part of the renewal of DMA as an organization. So this, what we're bringing forward this coming month, is just the approval of the assessments. I think in June or July, we're going to come back with October, I'm sorry. We're going to come back with the actual reconsideration of the 5-year renewal of the DMA as an organization. And the methodology is a combination of linear frontage on the public right-of-way, square footage of the use of the building, and if it's an apartment or hotel, the number of units or number of rooms. That kind of creates how we to calculate the formula for how people are assessed. And that really is supposed to be, really helps relate to how much work is the DMA actually going to have to do. The linear frontage of a property really determines how much how much time they have to spend cleaning that area.
And Mayor and Council Member, I would like to add that it is just on commercial properties. Single-family residential properties do not pay in. Since apartments are considered commercial, they do pay in for that.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
single-family property owners do not pay in on this.
Got
so,
it, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I figured it was just the businesses or entities that are businesses. Okay. Thank you, I appreciate you breaking that down a little bit for me. Now I can process more, thank you.
You're welcome.
Council, anything on the council agenda you want to ask questions on? Anything?
I had one really easy question for the item. It is, sorry, give me 2 seconds. Duly currently entity.
6A?
That one's a little more loaded. We're getting a presentation on that. 4D, I was just curious to know if our Pine Park and Whitman Park, is the whole project being covered by CBDG funds? Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Andrea Alicote, Interim Parks and Rec Director. Councilmember Taylor, to answer your question, so the CDBG funds is going for the construction of the project, which is part of the eligibility requirements to expend those funds. Specifically for Whitman Park, there were capital improvement, we were just speaking of those funds, infrastructure funds allocated in 2022, that $125,000 that were to cover the design services. So we do, as part of our life cycle plans for parks, it goes from our master plan identified projects and then also with the use and wear and tear of the parks. We have a long list of parks in need. And so part of what city staff does is in order to prepare those projects so that they can, as previously discussed, become shovel-ready when funding is available, staff does go and attribute then those design features so that way we're having those models and renderings in place. So those funds for Whitman, again, was in 2022, so there was $125,000 there. And then for Arpine Park, which was a basin that had no park amenities or features that will become now a park, those funds were allocated in 2023, and that was about just over $88,000. And again, that's for the design, so that way then we can have these shovel-ready projects when there's other funding streams to support that.
So then we take the CBDG and that's what covers
Correct.
the construction side of it.
Correct,
Okay,
yes.
Got it, that makes sense. All right, well, I'm excited for these parks to get a little bit of a facelift, yeah.
Okay, council, anything, other questions?
Are we getting the presentation on 6A?
Only if you'd like it.
Well, I hate to hang everybody up, but I went on quite a tirade about it, so I think it would be good for the public to know, because I brought it up to them too, and I wanted to know
Evan?
what was going on.
You want to fill in?
And the reason this was so important to me is because I looked at this space and I noticed when I was at the games, a lot of people make a right-hand turn when they leave. And I'm thinking, everyone's turning right. They're gonna go to Tempe Marketplace to spend their money, go eat food, go hang out. And so I saw this and thought, this is a great opportunity for which I built some renderings to put in shopping and dining. But then I talked to Mark and he walked me through.
And he said that if you wanted to buy the property and be a developer, you're welcome to do that.
I actually told my husband, I'm like, this is a great opportunity. He said, we don't have the budget for that.
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, just to kind of recap our conversation yesterday, that 3.1 acres is kind of tucked up against the on-ramp to the 101.
Right, the old animal
along the
shelter.
curb to the 202, and is the old Maricopa County Animal Control Shelter. The county demoed the site. It sat vacant for a while as they looked for buyers of where to go and who to work with. One of the things that the Cubs, through their outreach, connected with this developer in particular, because there's been changes between Major League Baseball and how they house minor league players, and the teams are required to provide specific housing for their minor league players wherever they're located within the team's system. This developer has done similar projects like this in the West Valley for a number of teams, and is now working with the Cubs to provide a similar project on this location. So the multifamily piece, as it's listed on there that you see, is a contracted piece specifically for the Cubs that will house their minor league operation, minor league players, staff that come in and go, and then the hotel located behind that will serve the general public, but also overflow for team functions and team operations. The concepts that you talked about of bringing dining opportunities and restaurant, retail, et cetera, we don't disagree with you. That we think this is a great site as well to do that. However, the distance between where people are able to park at this location and to get to this site is a long ways away. And so currently, even at the closest parking, while there's some parking, minimal parking located behind the site, on game days and activities, it's restricted access only to Cub staff, city personnel trying to get to the treatment plant, and deliveries.
Which means they'd have to walk across the green space.
So the closest parking is about a half a mile away. So there would be no foot traffic driven to this location for those type of opportunities. Pre-COVID, the city did an RFP for this location to work with a developer. That is where the Union office building and parking garage currently sits. As after COVID, as the office world and need has changed, we've worked with, asked that developer to, they proposed some other ideas. We asked them to engage with the Cubs and have that conversation of seeing what could be possible there. While we had some good conversations, nothing really generated out of what really attracted what we believe, like you, that could draw the right retail and dining and entertainment options. So those options for that developer have expired. We've let them know that those have expired, and the city intends to submit another RFP to the development community to see what opportunities there could be to look at developing.
And the
that site.
multifamily is just the baseball players,
Correct.
right? And that's all year?
Contracted specifically for the Cubs all year.
Okay. And then the hotel would be to house,
It would be the general public, but then overflow for the Cubs, because even what's
would we have that with the Sheraton and the Courtyard by Marriott? We have enough that this would receive that much overflow during spring training season?
based on the developer's market analysis, they believe it's a
Viable
option for them. Correct.
Okay.
Mayor, council members, as Mark alluded to, though, and we worked with Councilmember Heredia a lot on this, that Riverview, there's definitely tremendous opportunity for continued development at Riverview. That was always the intention back when that site was ultimately selected as the site for the stadium, was the mixed use opportunities that could come along with that. Part of that was the hotel, and we're glad that the Sheraton is there and operating. Part of that was office, and as Mark alluded to, the union was approved at a very different time for Class A office space, where it was flying off the shelves, basically, with everything that you saw along Rio Salado, and then COVID came along and changed those dynamics tremendously. But it's still one of the best sites. You're right at the 101, 202. You're just minutes away from ASU, from Sky Harbor. Riverview is still a tremendous opportunity for development as planned. And so we're definitely going to go back out to the market and look for development partners that can help us activate that area, bring the type of dining and retail with a multifaceted, you think of housing on top and the apartments below around the lake and other things like that we've talked about ever since that area was envisioned. But the economy didn't help us in that. But certainly the location has not changed as being one of the best spots in the valley for a development like that. So we hope to see more activity in that regard in the coming years. But this particular site definitely had some challenges to it from a development standpoint because of access, because of view lines off the freeway or where it's situated adjacent to the freeway. And that's one of the reasons why the county looked to dispose of that property as well. And now we see a good use that helps strengthen our relationship, of course, with the Cubs, but provides an opportunity where this developer at his risk he believes that the market is there for the hotel and to answer your question about that. And so we think that this is an appropriate use.
Mr. Reddy, you want to?
Just real quick, I think just to add, the more foot traffic that we can get at Riverview, the best. I think that's going to be an important aspect to how do we change the dynamics of in and around that area. And then on this site, I think Mark alluded to kind of the uses that we were getting right after the sale was kind of, your storage, your parking kind of uses as far as commercial. So we didn't want to go that route because how many storage units can you build in the city, right? So, but that's kind of the piece that I would add there. It's an interesting site. It's small, compact in that corner. And so I think this is probably the best use that we can get with the connection with the Cubs and trying to figure out like how do we add more people into that area all year round, not just in spring training, right? And so that's I think for us how we saw that potential. More work has to be done in that area, of course, right? But I think that the uniqueness of that site, the size, and just the uses that we're getting, it wasn't, I feel like it wasn't compatible to what we want to keep on building in that area, so.
You're happy with it?
Yeah.
Comment. Can I ask a question? Make a comment. Come on, Mayor.
Okay, I guess.
I think, I would totally agree with you, Councilmember Hurd. This seems like a great use. It's just too bad that, because it sounded like, and I did zone out a little bit on you, I must admit. But I think at first you said the major issue was parking.
Look at their faces. You have disappointed them.
Actually, I think Summers was talking to me. I was trying to pay attention.
You're a distraction, Scott.
But the retail was the parking issue.
It's in the, they can't use that parking back there during all this.
But why, you see just down the street, in Tempe, there's underground parking, there's parking garages. To me, and this is such a great site. I can't imagine that the land value here doesn't warrant that cost. I don't know. So talk to me about that. Why are we opposed to underground parking and parking garages in the city of Mesa? And I know it's not us.
Yeah.
Why are developers opposed to it?
So, Mayor, council member, can you repeat the question? I don't understand. We're certainly not opposed to the parking garages. It's expensive. They are expensive. They are, as we price them out and look at different options for other projects, they're about $30,000 a parking spot. And doing parking in a sports-centric development is different than parking for offices or retail, in that the volumes that you have to get in and out at the same times as a start of a game and an end of a game is a little bit different. So you have to work in those dynamics too. We don't disagree that whatever we do, we still have parking requirements that in a facility use agreement with the Cubs. So parking is always going to be a hurdle here that we need to work with the developer to overcome. And so, but in this particular 3.1 acre site, the way it's situated up against the highway, the restricted access to get in and out of there, right, because you have a signal right there for the on-ramps, you're limited to a right turn. You can't put another signal in. At Cubs Way and Rio Salado, we don't let anybody through there on game days or event days. So it's just, this particular site is a tough spot to do it. Down by the lakes, down in front of the other hotels, further back by the Union where we have a paved parking lot that accesses the trail system. All of those are viable options and have been identified as sites where additional parking garages are needed. And even when we only had to use it once this year, but we use the Union's parking garage now on overflow days. We only had to use it once this season, but
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it sounds like a lot of constraints with this particular site. It just seems like an area of increased density and activity going on that a garage or underground would be ideal.
Mayor and Councilmember, 100%. As Mark alluded to, as we talk about the redevelopment of Riverview, that will be the number one issue that we'll probably have to solve along with a development partner, is how do we provide the parking for the facility, and then obviously the users of what kind of mixed-use development eventually goes there. I think Mark's right on this site. 3.1 acres is not a lot of scale in order to get the cost benefit for a developer for the expense that goes into underground parking. You've really you see that on kind of larger scale sites or very, very urban sites where it can just pencil out, and this is neither. And I think that's why, from the development side, that no one has brought anything through the door. And if they could make money doing that, they would, right? And we just haven't seen anything like that.
So just to be short and clear, this is the best development option we have received for this particular plot of land since it's been leveled by the county.
Mayor,
And it has limited features.
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, you'd be correct with that statement.
Okay, well,
And I think Mark did mention earlier in his statement that it's a half-mile walk to the park. So that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit.
I was thinking some people might not know they're walking half a mile because they've had so many beers at the game. Like, just get me to the next destination. But that's probably just a few.
Yeah.
Okay, well, anything else? All right, gentlemen, thank you. I think we've covered all of our council meeting agenda items. Let's take a little break here. We'll get set up for item 2A, presentation on the fiscal year 2026-7. Okay, everyone, let's get back going. Okay, thank you, everyone. Item 2A is a presentation on the fiscal year 2026-27 summary of the proposed budget. Brian, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. Any questions?
Or all the time you need.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Yes, this is a overview summary of the proposed budget for the fiscal year 26-27 that the city manager is proposing. So, as the mayor, you mentioned, this is a summary. As we go through, it'll be more of an overview. We do have throughout April We do have departments coming and presenting their budgets in detail, so we can ask more detailed questions then, but we're more than happy to answer some of the questions now. So with me also is Sam Schultz. He is the Assistant Director for the Office of Management and Budget. So just a reminder of the process that the city goes through. Each year, we are required by law and appropriate annual expenditure budget and secondary property tax associated with that rate. And I know we just had a bond discussion about the secondary property tax and what that pays for. Annual budget sets the maximum expenditure limit. So once that budget is adopted, tentatively adopted, it sets that limit to where we cannot expend above that. And then also a balanced budget means that total resources available to the city must be sufficient to cover the budgeted expenditures. And I've mentioned that before, to where resources includes both revenues that the city receives, but then also the fund balance, any reserves that it has. So that equals the resources. And by state law, the city does adopt a balanced budget each year. And this year, the city manager's proposed budget for fiscal year 26-27 is balanced. So with that, we wanted to go through the proposed budget. We always have a theme, and this theme is to elevate Mesa. And so with that budget, we'll start off with the general governmental funds. And just to remind council and the viewers that we have two guidelines that we follow with the city. One is our policies that have been council adopted, and one is the principles that city manager practice, the city management practices. And so by policy, we do an adopted budget. Management, we want to do a balanced net sources and uses. Our policy states 8 to 10% reserve, but we like to shoot a little bit higher than that and go from 10 to 15% over the 5-year forecast period. And then also we forecast multiple years. And what that does is it helps sustain the sustainability of any programs and services that the city implements. Also with fees and charges reviewed annually, this helps with keeping wages and benefits competitive and to retain and recruit quality staff. And then a big one, what we just had the presentation on too, is the adopted 5-year capital improvement program. What this helps is with new projects, but also it invests in the life cycle and replacement and O&M projects. So some of the budget pressures that we are seeing, we've presented most of these at the, when we presented the forecast back in February, but wanted to go over those again because they are significant, especially the loss of ongoing revenue due to state legislation. Market-driven compensation and competitive benefits is a pressure. Fleet maintenance increases, software licensing increases, and then also building maintenance and utilities. We see increases in those. And then also the continuation of ARPA initiatives with ongoing general fund support. So those are some of the budget pressures that we are seeing for 26-27. And so with that, with those pressures, with the impact, the city is striving towards a structural balanced budget in fiscal year 29-30 by reducing ongoing the base budget. And what the city manager has asked is the departments to review their base budgets and submit a net 2% reduction on their ongoing budgets. And with going through that exercise, this is the forecast that was presented to council in February of 26. This does include that 2%. However, going through the budget meetings in March with the departments and some other budget updates that we go through, you see that the 29-30 forecast, we are meeting that goal of a positive net sources and uses of 2.3%. Or sorry, 2.3 million net sources and uses. And just to highlight the ending reserve balance, we do not drop below 21.4%. And so with that, as I mentioned, our principal is 10 to 15%. However, with this, with the stability of the revenues coming in, but also the stewardship of the departments and going through 3 years of 2% cuts, instead of doing it all in 1 year, we were able to kind of forecast out and take this in little chunks and bite sizes, to where now our goal from last year was positive net sources and uses outside of the forecast. Now we are 2 years ahead of schedule with that.
So again,
Thank you, Mr.
I have to stress it, 2 years
I think
ahead
you
of where
should.
we were last year on getting back into the black. So that's,
Thank you for your diligence on that.
well, we heard you, and everyone as part of this team sitting out here worked very hard to make that happen. We knew council wanted to see some movement on that, and so we're really proud to see that get moved up by 2 years.
Yeah, great.
So as I mentioned, with those 3 years, the last 2 fiscal years, and then coming up this fiscal year for 26, 27, the ongoing reductions is about $55.7 million. So over those 3 years, we have cut $55.7 million of ongoing expenditures out of the budgeted and the forecast. So with some of those.
So that, again, that's a big number. That's our entire Parks and Rec budget is roughly that same amount. That shows how much efficiency, how much savings that our departments have done over that 3 fiscal years. That's a lot of money. And that is what we've been able to save by tightening our belts, by finding efficiencies, by reevaluating positions, doing all the things that Brian's going to talk about that we've continued to do this year. But that is a lot of money that we've been able to identify and to reduce so that we're being as responsible as we can to the taxpayers.
And with that exercise, so focus on this slide of the public safety, police and fire. So police was asked to reduce by $4.4 million, in fire and medical by $1.4 million. And this is over the next 2 fiscal years because of the impact that this amount does have. So this year, PD is reducing their budget by 1.7 and converting 3 vacant sworn positions to civilians, and then reducing 9 full-time and 1 part-time vacant positions, and then reducing or doing away with the recruit signing bonus pay. So fire and medical reductions for 26, 27 amount to about $830,000. They're going to eliminate a market communications specialist 2 position, and then also reallocating 4 firefighter positions from the general fund over to the public safety sales tax fund. So that helps relieve the general fund of those expenses.
Brian, a couple of questions. Vice Mayor, you want to ask a question?
Was the recruit signing bonus out of the general fund, the locally generated general fund, or did that come out of a federal grant?
No, Mayor, Vice Mayor, that came out of the general fund.
So it was our money?
Specifically, yes.
Okay. Just a couple of quick questions. The projected for 25, 26 net sources of uses is down. We're underwater 36.3. This projection, what was our forecast for that this past year? Do you remember? Is it on track with our forecast?
So, Mayor, Vice Mayor, are you talking about the?
Well, our forecast
which
for last
forecast?
year for this fiscal year. So our
On which,
last year
are
we
you on
were
a
talking
specific
about it.
slide?
Huh?
Are you on a specific slide?
Yeah. Sorry.
You're on 8.
8.
Okay. So yes,
Oh, I'm ahead of you. I'm sorry. Go ahead. My bad.
Oh, are you zoning? Is it?
are you back or
I was
ahead?
zoning ahead of you.
So
Since I'm zoning ahead of you, if you would talk
you
about
want to go
that.
just a slide? Yeah, we can go to slide 14 and just skip everything if you want.
We can go to slide 24, but I think we should probably do this.
I might take you up on that, Brian.
So we are. So if we go back to slide 8, the projected 25, 26, I believe we were forecasting about $55 million in negative net sources and uses. However, we have seen some retail sales tax and some sales tax increases that we weren't anticipating because it has been better than what we were estimating. And then also we had some reduction in some expenditures. So we have gotten some savings. So we were projecting about $50 million, and now we're looking at $36.3 million for our projected in 25, 26.
Can
Can I ask a follow-up question, or are you done?
Yeah, I have to flip between the two. They're kind of far apart. Okay.
There's a button on the bottom. You can just-
Yeah, I know. I'm too old for that. You can't change my ways. Go ahead.
Can I ask, and you may not have this right handy, but what was the projected, or the forecast, I guess it would have been at the time, that we adopted the 24-25 budget? Because the actuals ended up at 16. What was the projected or forecasted at?
Yeah, but Mayor.
Because I'm sure it was.
Councilmember Goforth, yeah, I would have to go back and look to see what we budgeted for 24-25. It was, I'm sure it was negative net sources and
Yeah.
uses, however, with and I believe we got some one-time payments. I'd have to look at the graph, that our revenues came in much higher than what we were anticipating, especially with some of the sales tax and construction tax. And then we were able to reduce some of those expenditures. And I know with the total uses, what happens with that too is we have carryover where we think we're going to spend it in 24-25, but then it moves over to 25-26. So that reduces that actual total uses. So some of those move over also. So I would have to say that we were most likely budgeting in the negative, but then we came out positive.
Yeah, I think that's important because there's been a lot of discussion on this, and that's what we've done 7 of the last 10 years.
Right.
Because of conservative budgeting. It's not like we're just saying, oh goodness, we just don't have enough. I mean, it's very intentional, and it also is super conservative. And as we look and reevaluate throughout the year, as projects come online, get paid for, don't happen, vacancies fill or don't fill, that fluctuates constantly throughout the year.
Yeah, so Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, I did find my backup sheet. So we were budgeting for 24-25, negative $23.5 million. And we came in at positive 16.8. And a big portion of that was building permits. We had a lot of building permits come in, so we weren't anticipating. So the building permit revenues increased higher than what we were anticipating. But then, yes, we also had some personal service savings in some of the bigger departments to where they weren't able to fill those vacancies, so those actual expenditures did not hit.
Right, and so to have, and to have this 5-year forecast is important, but it's also important to recognize, we don't know every variable, right? We forecast and we try to be prepared for it. So because I think that's why it's important when we do vote on the budget, it is for this year only. And it is not for a 5-year forecast because it is too variable to guarantee that forecast will not change at all. So as you adopt the budget, you do it for that single year. I think that's important to know.
Mayor and council member, you're exactly right. Sometimes you get beat up, sometimes we get beat up for being uber conservative in our budgeting. And doing this 5-year forecast really just gives the quick point in time look ahead to what's going to happen. There are so many different economic factors that come into play, good and bad, that influence year 5, year 4, year 2 even of that. And so we have to look at the budget that we have today, and that's the most important thing. Like you said, that's all you're adopting, is the budget for this upcoming fiscal year. But we do this 5-year look ahead so that we're all prepared. We're all not flat-footed because we can see those trends and try to adjust. But we have a slide. I know Brian probably doesn't have it today, but we talk about it with you all. We've talked about it with our rating agencies. Every year we overperform our estimates every single year, and that is only because we budget so conservatively, and so we manage our expenses and we downplay our revenue. And so if we keep those expenses in check and then revenue comes in higher than projected, then that has led to our positive growth that we see over what our projections were.
And because that's not a precise calculation, I mean, I would much rather be on that end than the other.
Correct.
I mean, if it was a precise calculation, to be spot on would be the goal, but it will never be that. So
We can control our side, we can control the expenses, right? And that is why we load everything up, we budget with the expectation that every position is going to be filled for the entire year. We do all of these things because that's what we can control. And then on the revenue side, since those are factors largely out of our control by macroeconomic conditions by and large, then we just want to make sure that we're conservative in the picking kind of the lowest reasonable number that we think we're going to receive. And then as revenue exceeds that, I mean, this economy has been really resilient, right? And there's been war, there's been tariffs, there's been all kinds of shocks to the system, yet people have continued to spend. People continue to eat out. People continue to buy cars, thank goodness. And, you know, this is all reflected then in our better bottom line, but we budget with the unknowns in there and the idea that, yeah, there's going to be disruptions to the economy based on these other conditions. And when that doesn't happen and when spending stays resilient like it has, then we're coming in for the better because of that.
So just to bounce off that, if I may, because I think that answers the question I asked so poorly before, and I apologize for that. But what I was getting to is the difference between 14 and 18, or 8 and 14. So it sounds like 14 is the update for the best information you have to date over between the last 8 months when the February one, or last 8 weeks.
So,
See how I'm doing?
Yeah, so mayor, vice mayor, that's a good observation on that, to where slide 8, this is what we presented to council as part of the forecast now that we've gone through some of the budget stuff. Slides 9 through 13 are those adjustments that we made. And then slide 14 is what we are looking at as of today for the forecast for council to
Yeah, and I wish I could have articulated that a little bit better, but this is what causes, I think, a lot of confusion when people look at these numbers, because they change so frequently based on economic conditions and so many other factors that come in. So this is the target we're looking at right now and setting our, 14 is our target for what we're looking at for the budget.
Yes, that's right. That's the recommended position. So we wanted to show, again, this is, as Brian reflected, in February, he came to you and said, if nothing else changes, this is what our projections look like based off of last year's budget direction from the council. Then what slide 14 represents is the culmination of my recommendation budget to you that incorporates the other budget adjustments and enhancements that Brian and Sam have alluded to in those interim slides. So between February's numbers and this number, this reflects all the individual meetings that OMB and I had with the departments, those cuts that we accepted, those enhancements that we accepted, and then slide 14 shows essentially what we're asking council to consider as part of this year's budget.
Okay. In addition to better data on economics, income, and expenses.
Yes, because as each month passes, they're able to refine those numbers more succinctly as well.
Correct. Mayor and council, or mayor and vice mayor, with us, with our process, we do quarterly estimates, and within those quarterly estimates, departments are able to adjust during those times if new information comes up. So between the forecasted proposed budget of 25-26 to the updated forecast that we have now, there's 2 large changes in our projected numbers for 25-26. The first was development services. Their permit revenue was up, so we readjusted for that once those numbers came in, as well as we were given additional funding from Prop 400 for transit to help offset some of the costs that are being paid by the general fund today. So with that information, we adjusted that forecast accordingly.
And that's where we can be nimble. For example, if March revenue forecast came in lower, we always joke about March being our second Christmas or our first Christmas in some regards, we could make adjustments to that before we get to the point of actually adopting the budget as we go through this process. So that's why we stay nimble and flexible as soon as they get updated budget numbers on a quarterly or monthly basis. And Mayor and Council, just so you know, we sit down monthly, OMB and I do, we review all these numbers, we review the trends coming out, we use the University of Arizona economic forecasting unit to do that. So we are constantly monitoring and making adjustments. So if we saw something happen, which is essentially what Mr. Brady and these folks went through when COVID happened and saw such a major shift, they were able to pivot immediately. So it's not like we wait 12 months to do this. This is something that we are working on monthly and looking at those trends that are happening in the economy monthly as we try to balance that budget throughout the year.
So can I assume on like a very happy note that it's possible that net sources and uses that's negative 29 million might actually change at the end of next year to look quite different for us and possibly not be in the negative?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, that is a good assumption. We have, as I think Councilmember Goforth has alluded to, since the past 5 years that I have here, we have budgeted a negative net sources and uses because we like to put in all the expenses that we may think that are going to happen for that fiscal year. But then as the fiscal year goes through, we either get additional revenues or the expenses don't happen. So out of the 4 of the last 5 years, we have ended with a positive net sources and uses. And the one where we were negative was because we had significant amount of one-time revenues coming in. And so what we did is we set those aside to help with city infrastructure and city repairs and maintenance of all of our buildings and things like that. So that's the only reason we have a negative, is because we decided to set some of those revenues aside to help out with our facilities.
Thank you.
Brian, before you get going back to one of your first ones about public safety, slide 9. I just want to make sure, I've said in the past, public safety is non-negotiable. However, as long as this does not affect our policing or our fire department response for sworn personnel, I want to make sure that doesn't happen. If they're switched over to civilian personnel, I'm okay with that. But as long as we keep the sworn personnel out there, as well as the professional staff, I mean, it's a two-prong attack. I want to just make sure that we have what we need to police our city and provide fire medical services.
Yes, Mayor, Council, when looking at these reductions, we work with police and fire medical, and this is, so for instance, the police department, one of the, there's 3 of the positions that one of their processes, they have 3 sworn positions, detectives, as part of this process. However, with the process, they see that the current process that's working now is they distribute the duties across the department. Well, what they're going to do is they eliminate those 3 positions, but those people will then move into vacant police officer positions. So we're not reducing our sworn, we're not eliminating any sworn. What we're doing is they have a decent amount of vacancies that they can move those 3 in and now be better utilized throughout the department. And so that, and what they plan on doing, and they'll speak more about this next Thursday when they come back, is that with that process, once that happens, they'll now hire professional staff, non-sworn staff, to fill some of those positions back.
Are we redeploying staff or are we hiring new staff? I guess that's,
Yeah, I mean,
that's for the future
Yeah,
discussion.
absolutely, and we can dive into that. The answer is a little bit of both. I mean, they're continuing to fill those vacancies, but they've identified some positions, some that they can civilianize, some that they did not need and wanted to reprioritize, and the chiefs can both talk about that next Thursday when their departments are here to present. But just on the civilianization side, kudos to Chief Butler and the whole team at Mesa PD, because I think we lead the nation in trying to find positions within the department that don't need to have a sworn presence, that a civilian, a highly trained civilian can fill that role. And that is it's more cost effective for the department, and it just realigns their resources better, because if you can have a sworn person filling a position where sworn is needed and a civilian filling some investigative role or something that it's not, or support role that you did not need a highly trained sworn police officer, it's just a win-win for the department and saves the taxpayers money. So I appreciate the chief, and they'll talk about that next week. But our department, I would argue, leads the nation in trying to find that. When you look at other departments, there's a lot of sworn positions doing work that you don't need to be a trained peace officer in order to do. And so, yeah, so appreciate that.
Okay. Go ahead, Brian, Sam.
So on the next slide, wanted to go over just some highlights of the reductions from other city departments. So we had 25 vacant positions across the city that we reduced out of the budget. We're able to, with some of the subscription costs, discontinuing some of those that are rarely used. So the departments went through and to see, okay, what are we using, what are we not using? And so they were able to eliminate some of those subscription costs. Same with contract costs through renegotiations. One of the examples of this is our Verizon bill. DeWitt went through a renegotiation of our Verizon bill to lower that, to help out with the costs. Even with equipment costs that meet staff needs, what we review all the time too is laptops or any computer or any other equipment. Do they need the best of the best, or do they need something that just fits their need, which is a little cheaper, and we do that. Also, same with insurance premiums and aligning with the city needs. I know the city attorney's office did this with some of our insurance and was able to save the city some money by looking at our insurance premiums and maybe lowering our thresholds that fit our need and taking a review of that. And then also some of the other ARPA funding that has lapsed that now will be general fund supported. So some of the resources that we were able to put into the forecast also is we're seeing about a $2 million a year credit card purchase and cooperative contract rebates that the city is getting through our purchasing department. Business Services has done a great job with doing that. And then also increasing projected revenues with building permits. We increased that slightly. We're seeing a little uptick in some of our permits that we're receiving. So we were able to adjust our revenues on that side. So some of the enhancement requests, so departments submitted about a $6.6 million one-time and ongoing requests. 4.8 requests were approved, and some of those, as you may be aware of, is the $3 million for the redevelopment toolkit pilot. That is for the 3-year pilot. And then also some of the positions, we have an assistant city prosecutor, a senior internal auditor. I'm not sure the last time the audit department had an increase, but this position is going to be dedicated more towards the IT side of it. So that's one of the positions that they're looking to fill. Is they've got the other ones doing all the other audits, but it would be good to have kind of an IT specialization in there. Also the HVAC control technicians. This is one where facility maintenance really looked at to see is it more cost effective to contract out or more cost effective to come internal? And it was more cost effective to come internal with all the HVAC controls that we are getting. It is good. It was more efficient and cost effective to bring someone on board to be able to oversee that. And then we also have some third-party process server for code. We included that. What this does is frees up the code officers to do more community-based observations and not have to go and do the serving. We have a third party now serving those violations, so that frees up the code officers on their time for that. And the other position we wanted to highlight is the IT technician 3, and that's to help support the Wi-Fi that the city put in. And what this is to maintain that city Wi-Fi that is at city-owned facilities. So we do plan on continuing the free Wi-Fi at the city-owned facilities.
So, Mayor and Council, to that point, some of the items that Brian just highlighted really reflect the feedback that we heard from you all. And I know Councilmember Taylor was just having this conversation with staff the other day about how we evaluate in-house versus contract work. And so we're constantly doing that. And Brian highlighted 2 positions where we've been paying contractors to do it, but we realize the workload is there, that we can save money in the long run by bringing those positions in-house. And and doing that ourselves instead of relying on contract service. It's more cost effective and more timely to do those. Then on the process servers, we know, we've heard you loud and clear about the emphasis on code compliance. A few years ago, as a budget saving measure, we started having our code officers actually serve the citations. And all that does is take them out of the field where they're, instead of spending time working on code compliance issues, they're trying to also serve citations. And so we're going back to using, we saw that was not an effective use of their time. So we're going back to going back to use a process server in order to do that, which frees up the time for code compliance to spend on the things that you all have talked about. And then the auditor, that's something we're all talking about, efficiency and accountability. Joe has not had a new position, as Brian said, in a very long time. I don't know if any of us remember exactly when we've added to the city auditor's office. So adding a position will allow them more throughput, more ability to work with the departments, ensuring compliance and proper efficiencies. And so and then on the prosecutor's office, Paul Hawkins and his team are doing a great job, but they're overwhelmed. And so we needed to provide some relief for them so that we can continue to ensure timely justice is served through that effort. So that's why we're recommending another city prosecutor. So even though we're very lean and intentionally, we knew that there are some needs out in the departments and priorities that the council had that we needed to reflect some additional spending to reflect that.
All right, thank you, Brian.
So on the next slide, I want to highlight some city infrastructure costs that are also included in the proposed budget. Is we have $6 million for facility maintenance and improvements throughout the city, $3 million for park maintenance and improvements. Also, the main library Saguaro room updates we have budgeted in there. And then also at the Red Mountain Library, there's two areas that they wanted to focus on of improvements. One is the children's room renovation for $500,000, but then also the program room updates for $230,000.
So again, the emphasis on catching up on our deferred maintenance and making sure that we're maintaining the things that we need to be. So that $9 million that you see between facilities and parks, that's going to make sure that, we're continuing to make sure we don't fall behind and doing everything we can to catch up. And then as Brian mentioned on the Red Mountain Library, I think several of you were there and commented too about, that there's definitely some TLC that we need to have for some of our facilities, and we've identified the funding to be able to assist in some of the enhancements there as we've continued to invest in our public spaces in the libraries.
Okay.
So with those adjustments, we come back to slide 14. So this includes all of the adjustments that were just now previously discussed. And so with that, what we are looking at, so we were previously in the forecast on fiscal year 29-30, we were at 2.3 million. Now with some of those adjustments, we did have some enhancements. We had some other adjustments on expenses, but we were able to now, we're at 1.8. So going from 2.3 to 1.8 is a testament to the staff of doing their reductions and holding it to it and being able to find some efficiencies in some of those expenditures, but also taking a look at some of those revenue sources that we may be able to capitalize on. So now with the projected for 25-26, I believe we're at 33 million, but now we're looking at 29 million. The budget for 26-27, we're looking at a 31.1 negative. However, depending on how the expenses are and how revenues come in, as mentioned, that could be positive. But what this does include is all the positions being funded and also some one-time, as we mentioned, like we kind of talked about some one-time, and we have some one-time expenses in here. Specifically for 26, 27, one of the big one-time costs is the PD radios. So that is about $9 million, $8 million, $8.5 million. That's in that for one time. So we do throughout the forecast. That's the same with the forecasted for 27, 28. We have some one time for some fire radios. And so with that, those one times, when we start getting closer to 28, 29, 29, 30, we may start including some of those depending on how the life cycle is on that. And this is where we get to the previous discussion of what do we cash fund and what do we bond fund. And this is a lot of cash funded life cycle and some of the projects like we had on the previous slide of the children's room and some of the renovations, we cash fund those because that's what we know that we can fit that in with the budget to where we are very strategic on what do we want to bond fund, how long is it going to last, how big is it, and that. So with this, we do have a negative net sources and uses for 26, 27, but however, we are increasing our net sources and uses, and the goal was 2 years, getting that to 2 years from outside of the forecast. And right there, we're meeting the goal. And with the ending net sources and uses, we don't drop below 18%. Yeah, we were just above 20, 21%, but with 18%, we are still above our principal of 10 to 15%. And that is still looking good as you see it. We grow out of that throughout the 5-year forecast.
And again, going back to the point that Councilmember Goforth made earlier, this is a snapshot in time for those out years, but we're still maintaining, it's the trajectory, right? Some of these numbers will change, revenue will change, uses will change, but it's that trajectory of how we're growing out of this by being fiscally responsible and then letting that natural growth happen. So we've been able to make those adjustments that were needed, but the trajectory is still stronger than we saw last year at this time as we presented the budget.
A question.
Yes.
If you go back to where you talk about the departments submitted 6 million in one time requests, but 4.8 million were approved, and then there's some examples, and then the next slide says 6 million, it talks about, so these are separate.
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, these are separate. These are other life cycle type projects, cash funded projects that are more infrastructure related. The previous slide was their ongoing. So this is one-time funds that we're using for these. And so
The second slide is one time.
Mhm.
Okay.
And so the previous one is reducing their base budget of their ongoing base budget to meet that 2%. This is what we were looking to fund out of the, for these departments. They didn't cut these. This is what we're looking to fund. So these are, I wouldn't say they're enhancements, but they're things that we continually to look at on one-time funds to be able to.
So did every department do a net 2% reduction? Or were we more surgical?
Yeah, they all did. Then we
They all
went
did.
through.
Okay.
They sat with me. Not all of the cuts from every department did I accept. Some of them would not have made sense in the long run to do that. And so that's why we asked each department to do that. They had to submit that net 2%. But then we went through each and every department, each and every line item to determine whether that was a cut that made sense or a cut that it might get us 1 year savings, but it's cutting off your nose to spite your face in some regard. And some of those we rejected and said, no, you need to keep maintaining it at that level.
So our budget is basically flat for the next year, the 26, 27. Our uses are basically flat. Our expenses were, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, yes. Between projected 25, 26 and what we're looking to budget for, the general governmental fund for 26, 27, the uses are pretty flat with that.
Doesn't mean some of our costs didn't go up, but we've reduced in other areas that we have flattened that line.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I mean, we continue to see the pressures on commodities, all those things Brian listed at the very start, we continue to see, wages, other things increase that it's reflected in this, but that's where tightening our savings. And Councilmember Taylor and I were just talking about this a minute ago. So if you go to that, to total uses in FY27, if you just added $56 million to that, that would essentially be where we were had we not made these 2% adjustments over the last few fiscal years. So that 732 number quickly becomes 787, give or take, if we had not made those adjustments.
And those have happened over the past 3 years?
Correct.
Starting in 2024, 24, 25?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, yes. When Mr. Brady was here as city manager, we started in 24, 25 with the 2% cuts, and then we also did 25, 26 for this current fiscal year we're in, and now we're doing it for 26, 27. So over those 3 fiscal years, we are looking to reduce our ongoing budget by $55.7 million. So that's the total amount of the reductions over those 3 fiscal years that are ongoing. And I wanted to go back to the previous slide also. The library updates is one time. The facility maintenance, I wanted to highlight facility maintenance and park maintenance. That is ongoing. We allocate that every year. And we work with the Parks and Rec and also with facility management on allocating those funds every year to them so they can prioritize any improvements that they need.
I'm just curious about this slide. So this can't be the only, why did you include these?
I just wanted to highlight some of these major ones that are kind of ongoing that we look at. What will come back is I think it's April 16th, I'll come back with a full city CIP, and we'll go through that, which will include all of the bigger life cycle, and all of the capital projects that the city is looking to do for budgeting for next fiscal year, but then also the 5-year plan.
Because sometimes I think, council, when we focus on some of the bright, shiny, fun projects, fire stations and other things like that, it takes away from the fact of, going back to the discussion earlier, there's a lot of one-time spending that we do for facilities and other things like that we pay
out of the general fund.
Out of the general fund, that we pay cash for. We find one-time revenue, and we can say, okay, we need to reinvest that because we know we have some building maintenance or facility upgrades that we need to do, and they don't get all the attention that maybe a new building or a new facility gets and all the ribbon cuttings that go with it. But it's essential, both for, as we saw in fire stations, we spent money on bathroom upgrades in order to, because these are 24-hour living facilities for our employees, and we're looking at that throughout the city. Where are facilities that we need to do better by our employees or by the customers, by the residents who may come in and utilize those spaces, and how are we keeping on track of that? And that's what facilities maintenance has been really focused on. So we just wanted to highlight some of these because, as Brian said, they don't get all the attention when we talk about big road projects and stations and other things like that. But these are essential to maintaining our own infrastructure, our city infrastructure in these buildings. So
That would have been the last study session, the gentleman that came up and he talked about all of the air conditioning units and all of the nuanced details that cost to run all of our 317 buildings.
I think it's even more than, I think it's 500 and something, buildings.
That's part of.
That's right,
Yes.
Exactly. And they have an ongoing cycle that they look at every year to try to prioritize projects within that.
I have one quick question. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you done?
No, I'm done.
Okay. The prior slide that has the 6.6 million in one-time and ongoing requests, this is something that we still have yet to vote our approval on though, correct?
That's what's
Because I was actually
embedded-
looking at the redevelopment toolkit, because we landed on yes, we like it, we're still moving forward, but some of us may have some other suggestions that we still want to implement.
Sure. Mayor and council, what that represents, the 4.8 million in approved requests are embedded in my proposed budget. And so certainly any of those we can talk about. We wanted to go ahead and put the full amount of the ask on the redevelopment toolkit, we were able to find, we had some money in the general fund that had been programmed for an ongoing expense starting this year that we're going to look for non-general fund money based on council direction on that, but that'll be another discussion. But that freed up 2.5 of the $3 million that we could then rededicate towards the redevelopment program. So it was already in our forecast for 2.5 of that $3 million. So that really softened the blow of adding the additional money for the redevelopment program into that, so.
I'd also like to point out that I'm very impressed with the fact that you kind of had a carte blanche request to do 2% across all departments, but you were still strategically surgical in that we could add some necessary employees to our city that would offset a more expensive cost. So I know how much contractors and subcontractors cost, and they often are quite a bit pricier than if we have the workload to just go hire someone and have them work for the city full-time.
Yeah, absolutely, Mayor and council members. Sometimes it's an easy talking point to be able to say, well, we privatized this or we outsourced this, but if we end up spending more, we haven't done right by the taxpayer, and so this is where we.
And the taxpayers approved of that, because I went to a few meetings, HOA meetings, LD meetings, and I said, here's the situation. You know, we can do budget cuts and we can take people out. But that doesn't mean that you're gonna feel a positive benefit from that, because there are certain departments that our city has where these employees are fighting for you every single day. And there are very positive consequences to us having more of them on board, not less of them.
Right.
Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, just to add on to the $3 million discussion, as Brian had mentioned, the budget itself, what you all adopt creates the maximum spending limit. So with the proposed budget, the $3 million, what that does is it creates the capacity. If you guys decide to go a different direction, we can pivot on that capacity, but this allows you to spend up to that $3 million depending upon what is decided by council. So we use it as a planning mechanism.
So each individual program that Jeff and others described in the redevelopment toolkit is something that you're not voting on that by approving this budget. This is just setting the upper limit because that was the top of their ask. And then council, if there were any programs within that $3 million that they weren't comfortable with or they wanted to bring the amount down to a different number, you could do this, but this gives you the flexibility to make ultimately that decision of investing the whole $3 million that was discussed.
That's helpful, thank you.
Go ahead, Brian.
So moving on to the utility fund. In this fund, and we'll get to it in a little bit, as you all aware, is a little different than the general governmental fund because now this is an enterprise fund. The utility fund has similar financial policies and principles. Highlight a few little different ones than the general governmental fund is with the financial principles of the utility fund. We like to try to keep a higher reserve fund balance percentage, anything higher than 20%. Then also what we look at is, I think it was discussed previously in the previous presentation, was smooth rate adjustments throughout the forecast. This helps with the forecast of any debt service payments, any capital payments, things like that. Also, equity between residential and non-residential water rates, and then also keeping the utilities affordable. So some of the pressures we've highlighted before, I just want to remind market-driven compensation and competitive benefits. Fleet maintenance is another one. Also, we've got water commodity costs, 91st Avenue and Val Vista Water Treatment Plant. We are part owners with that. We don't run them, but the cost increase with those are becoming significant. So we have those cost pressures on those repairs and maintenance for those two facilities.
Hey, I just want to interject there. That's why some legislation, some bills out there are not very conducive to cities funding and just the pressures on our budget overall. I had a conversation with one of our state president, President Peterson, about this recently. So he understands. Hopefully some bills don't go very far. Let's put it that way. Thank you.
So yes, Mayor and Council, so some with the strategic, some of the impacts, the city manager asked even the utility departments to come up with a 2% reduction plan also. And so they submitted that plan, and with the forecast that we presented in February, this also includes that plan. I won't go over too much of this because we've already talked about this a decent amount of where this includes a capacity fee where all of those projects are moved out, and we've been able to move some of those in, and has significantly helped the forecast for the utility fund. And as you see with the where previously when we did not have the capacity fee, the net sources and uses was negative throughout the forecast. Now being able to move those projects out and not have the ratepayers bear the capital costs, we are now positive net sources and uses in 28, 29. So even though with the reductions, they came up with 3.8 ongoing reductions. The city manager reviewed them, and he did 1.7 million in ongoing expensive, and a majority of that was just an overtime and temporary staff due to fiber to premise. So that project is slowing down, so we're able to reduce that overtime and temporary staff. Some of the other things that were in there is just normal operational savings that they were looking at for any contractual services and things like that. So they're only 1.7. So as I mentioned, and this is significant because as you saw the forecast previously, so the city with resources, the capacity fee is going to bring in an estimated $24 million annually. This is significant because it is growth pays for growth. It is the contractors paying for the growth that is going to impact the utility systems. And also, this capacity fee will be reviewed with the utility general plan, which is usually about 4 to 5 years. So with that, this is when that fee will be reviewed also with those.
So when is that, what fiscal year is this reflected in, the 24?
So this is reflected in this coming up fiscal year, 26, 27. Okay. So there, that would be a full fiscal year of the capacity fee. So it would be in 26, 27, but you won't see it in, what we did is you're not going to see this revenue in this forecast because this is the utility fund. We deposit these funds in a separate restricted fund to be able to pay for those projects. So this is not reflected. What's reflected in this
is the reduction in
the reduction in capital cost of the debt service, really, of that 400 million that we were able to move out of this fund. We were able to move out that debt service that the utility fund would have been paying, and so with moving that out, it helped the forecast for the utility fund for that.
And the full 24 in, because I thought there was a discounted.
There is, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, there's a discount that was started in January 1 that goes through June 30th of this calendar year. Okay. And then next fiscal, so July 1 is when the full fee will be in place.
Okay, great, thank you.
So some of the enhancement requests, they submitted 2.1 enhancement requests. And some of those requests is about $250,000 for the lead and copper, the LCR, but then also the PFAS analytical services, continuing with those services. Also is the Bartlett Dam feasibility study and the SCIF technical review. We'll be able to go into more of those when the utility departments, when Water Resources comes in and does their presentation on the 16th of April. And then also what we're able to do with this is add a third shift at the East Mesa Service Center for fleet services. What this shift primarily focuses on is the solid waste trucks, being able to maintain the solid waste trucks, not just at the West Mesa Service Center, but it'll now be at the East Mesa Service Center also. So this will help with those trucks and keeping them maintained so they can go out on a daily basis on the 6 days and be able to pick up the trash. So this will significantly help solid waste on maintaining their trucks.
Mayor and Council, I can't stress enough the importance of this third shift that we're adding. This will help our reliability across our fleet, but specifically solid waste, to make sure that we have the trucks out rolling the next morning to meet the needs of picking up our trash and recycling each day. The problem is, and we'll talk about this, about future investments that we're going to need. We just have, as you're all probably aware, very antiquated fleet services centers that we can't even fit some of our trucks inside, because these were facilities that were built decades ago that just aren't meeting the needs of our current fleet. And so we've got to, one, do better for our employees so that they have the ability to utilize these, but the throughput and the capacity that we have is so limited that our only option right now, because we don't have additional bays, we don't have additional space, that'll take time. Again, we're going to come back and talk to you about the needs to how to address that. But in the short term, we can stand up a third shift immediately and be able to increase that efficiency of getting those trucks out on the street. So that this is a vital enhancement, I think, for our reliability, especially on the solid waste side.
Mr. Heredia?
I think, Mr. Butler, just a quick question on that end. Any analysis, or maybe once fleet or the department presents around like lost time, lost amount of resources that we have because of antiquated equipment, just to have as far as backup to see why this investment is needed, right? As far as how much money do we either lose or time, because that time is also money, right?
Absolutely.
And so just reference there. So.
Yeah, Mayor and Councilmember Heredia, we'll definitely come back to you. We're working on this right now because it's not just our west side facility just up the street, but it's also our east side yard where we have some major infrastructure needs that support public safety and our utilities, and it's all about the ability to get these vehicles maintained and then back out onto the street. And it's a major lift that the city needs to tackle. Frankly, we put it off for too long because this didn't happen overnight, and some of these facilities, they didn't become antiquated overnight. And so it's maybe not the most glamorous side of what we do, but it's essential for keeping our police vehicles and our solid waste trucks out running on the streets. And so we'll come back, Councilmember Heredia, and have a more robust discussion about that, because it's a more complicated answer that involves many different pieces that we're working on, including some land transactions by our east side facility and space in our west side facility where we have to relocate some storage yards that we have there in order to free up the space for expansion of our fleet facilities. So it's a real game of you have to do one thing before you can do the other, and acquire land before you can do the investments on the other side. But this is a short-term Band-Aid towards a much bigger problem that we have.
I just want to say, Scott, thanks for bringing up police, because that's our number one concern, is the ability to get their the cars out and back on the road. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one quick question about the feasibility study for Bartlett Dam, and forgive me, is Mesa participating in that as I thought it was just SRP that was doing it, so, okay.
So yeah, Mayor,
Since we're a recipient
Councilmember
of-
Taylor, yes, that's what this allocation will go to, is that feasibility study. We are part of that, and so we're helping pay for that. The total cost of the feasibility study is more than that.
I would
but we're
assume it's
part of-
quite a bit more than that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
this is our portion of that
We're
feasibility
throwing in,
study.
okay,
Yes.
got it, thanks.
And that allows us, it's the same method essentially that we did when Roosevelt Dam was raised years ago, where we were one of the entities that went through the feasibility study, then ultimately supplied funding for that, but that assured us a portion of that allocation. That's the same analysis that we're doing right now on Bartlett. Us and other cities that are interested are going through this, and then at the end of the day, if it all pencils out and the decision was made to move forward with that, we would have a guaranteed allotment of whatever is stored behind Bartlett.
Because we're putting it.
Because we're putting in.
So we're paying to play.
It's pay to play.
Okay.
You got to have skin in the game, because every city or entity would love a portion of that water, but you got to put your money where your mouth
So we
is.
can
and
say
this
we
is
pay
it.
to play too.
We do. Yeah, absolutely.
Brian, I just want to add, all of our departments who provide service to our city, our utilities, our solid waste, I just applaud our employees and the directors who work so hard every day, because that's one of I use the word full service city that we are. We provide all these services, and it's important to keep everything that we have going. And more importantly, we have the service centers. I know that the West Mesa one to the north of us is an older one. I can't remember how old, but it's way old. It needs to be updated. But getting those trucks, everything out there, adding the third shift helps facilitate that. And, it will cost some money, but at the end of the day, we'll be more efficient with our resources that we have. And as far as the water part on Bartlett, yes, a bunch of municipalities are participating in that for accrual of water, having another bucket of water available for us in the future. And hopefully that dam can start building in about 8 years. So we have 8 years more payment, Ms. Taylor, of this, and then we'll pay for some additional water as well.
Well, and then we'll get to some real money. This is the feasibility study, and this is, pocket change compared to what we'll be talking about.
Unless
if
the
it actually,
federal government steps in and just pays for it all.
Well, that would be great. I hope you all lobby for that. So.
All right, sorry, Brian.
No,
Go on.
That's good, Mayor. Yeah, so the next slide just shows the forecast of the utility fund, as I mentioned. This is a positive forecast for the utility fund, and it is especially positive due to council passing and adopting the capacity fee. So we're able to focus on repairs and maintenance and other operational priorities for the utility fund. And with
Yes, Ms. Duff.
On this, Brian, our financial principles is 20% for our reserve fund, and this year's projected at 16.6%. Are you concerned, and will it affect our bond rating?
So, Mayor, Councilmember Duff, the 16% I'm not too concerned about. We are still meeting our policy of 8 to 10%. That principle we like to shoot for throughout the forecast is at 16.6. However, if just similar to the general governmental fund, we like to budget everything that we can for in the utility fund. And as you see in the previous year, the actuals came in at 2.4 million positive, so at 21.7%. So we'll see how the utilities go with how the weather is. With this being a warm summer already, I think we went from winter to summer, and so the water usage.
We never had winter.
Yeah, that's true. We went from spring. Yeah. So I am not too concerned with this. As it is, it's a planning document to where we just had the ratings calls and presented the forecast with them, and they seemed pretty pleased with the forecast. So we'll monitor this. As I mentioned, it's a planning document for the next 5 years, but we review this on a monthly and quarterly basis with the utilities, and as part of what Sam said, on the quarterly basis, we go through with every department of their expenses and revenues and see what their estimates are going to be for the rest of the fiscal year, and this will get updated. So we'll see how the 25-26 ends, but then also the 26-27, as you see it improves to 11.6, but then also then the following year it's pretty flat, and then in 28-29 we have a positive. So I am positive with this forecast.
Yeah, we'll have to see how negotiations work out on our water agreement. It is evident from anybody you talk to, we are going to get a huge cut, is what that number is, but everybody says expect a huge cut, and water prices are going to skyrocket. So given that, and we like to keep our rates fairly stable and not do huge increases, I'm sensitive to making sure that we have enough reserves so that we don't have to do spiked increases as we experience cuts and water cost increases. So I don't know, it's just something we have to really watch. I know we've already passed our rates and such. We'll have to watch and see how the agreement pans out. But even best case scenario, we're still going to see huge water increases, rate increases from the CAP. So well, we'll have to see how we do and make sure that we have some reserves to weather it the best we can so we don't have to have, pass along huge increases as well. Thanks.
Jen, thank you for pointing that out. You make me think of a question that, it might be for both of you. Is it possible to help offset some of those very likely increases with the funds that we're gonna receive from the capacity fees for our residents and our commercial businesses?
So
might be a
Mayor,
loaded
Councilmember
question.
Taylor, yeah, that's more of a legal thing for what I understand with the capacity fee. The capacity fee is for projects, growth projects only. It can't be used for operational maintenance. This would go for like purchasing water and helping offset that. So that's where the capacity fee comes in, is where we were able to move those growth projects out. For instance, like the Signal Butte expansion and some of the wells, the capacity fee would pay for that one-time project cost, but then the operational maintenance then bears on the utility fund itself.
Okay, thanks.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much.
So Mayor, that's the overview. And now
Yes.
we'll get into the fund, starting with your next item of the actual budget presentations that'll
By the
continue
departments.
through the entire month of April. And then we'll come back to you in early May, right? Or is it the very end of April with
April 30th, yeah.
April 30th.
We take a quick break for the mayor's State of the City address, and then we'll be back
You
to
take a
wrap it.
break.
Yes. And then we will come back with a tentative budget update on the April 30th.
When you have the actuals for 25, 26, when we talk about, projected, when do the actuals come in? Ms. Duff's comment, when we see the real numbers out there.
So 25, 26, we work with finance. They go through their year-end process. And so we would not see actuals. It would be an estimated actuals, is usually around September, October. When the audit gets finalized in the opinion, then that's when we update our actuals, because then we know that's when it closes and there's no adjustments from the auditors.
So June 30th is that cutoff, and then?
The June 30th is the cutoff, however.
And the
when-
actuals,
Yes.
3 or
and-
4 months later.
Yes, because then there's also the accruals and any revenues coming in, any expenses, especially on the project side of that type of stuff, to where we're still having some expenditures in July and August when they invoiced us for services in June and in May, things like that.
So Mayor, even though we won't have a reconciled actuals at that point, once we see the way that sales tax performs though through the rest of the fiscal year, that gives us a good clue about, overall kind of where we are relative. Like we said, they've been strong. We are estimating that we'll continue to see strong revenue from sales tax. But once we get those actuals in, which come in on a monthly basis, we'll be able to at least have an idea of how close we were to some of those estimates.
All right.
That's one of the bigger fluctuating factors, potentially fluctuating factors.
Very good. All right, thank you. Thank you. Next is item 2B, a presentation to provide direction on the Parks, Rec, and Community Facilities Department budget. Andrea, are you by yourself?
She's got a team, but since she's, been gracious enough to step into this role on an interim basis, we thought we'd let her off the hook and let her get this over and done with first, so she didn't have to sweat it out into later April. So appreciate her and her leadership right now.
All right.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. And I know it's been a long morning already, but I do have the honor of being able to help share the story of the Parks and Recs and Community Facilities budget proposal. And I do want to recognize the team that's here with me. So next to me is our Senior Fiscal Analyst, Allison Walker. She is the one that works all of the magic with the numbers behind the scenes. And then in our audience as well, we have our Deputy Directors, Brandon Erno, Roger Singleton, and acting in the interim position as well, Haley Smith. These truly are an amazing executive team for the department of experts, of those that have a tremendous leadership skills, that lead the department with a lot of care and compassion, and have certainly helped to support what we're going to bring to you today. So being the first department that gets to present to you, I also will be able to share a little bit of context on these public purpose statements that you'll be seeing from the various departments that we'll be presenting. You heard earlier this year from the Office of Innovation and Efficiency on their game plan to help support the city manager's vision in unifying the different departments with public purpose statements and direction on how we are going to be moving from an output to outcomes-based KPI model. And so with the Parks and Recreation and Community Facilities, our new public purpose statement, we're still supported by our missions and values, but these public purpose statements are newly updated. So as you will see, our department exists for the care for, to operate and activate vibrant public spaces and resources. To us in the department, this is really pointing to a lot of those that you don't see on the back end. That is our finance department, our internal IT department, our internal support staff that again are not in the public facing side. Through fostering safe and welcoming environments, this is really pointing to our parks maintenance crew. Impactful events, this is what we're gonna learn more from our convention center, the Post, special events team, and then dynamic experiences, and this is all of our recreation activities. So those that you see there in yellow we'll have a further discussion on how we are gonna be envisioning new KPIs based off of those three areas. And then to uphold Mesa's commitment to cultivating a thriving community, this is really then pointing again towards the city managers, your council goals, and some of those departments that also adhere under this thriving community bucket are those counterparts with the libraries, arts and culture, community services, a lot of those human service-facing departments. So before we get started in some of the meatier elements, we also wanted to touch on some accomplishments and highlights for the department. You all know that our aquatics facilities are truly top of the line. We have Olympic qualifying pools. They hold national competitions. But to point to council's strategic priorities of safety and public safety, I wanted to recognize that they recently had acquired some awards last year specific for aquatic safety and drowning prevention. And so again, this shows our continued commitment to those public safety investments in our community. Additionally, I know we all feel that our Merry Main Street is the best way to celebrate the holidays each year, but so does the state recognition. So this was another wonderful tribute to our special events team and the quality events that we truly bring to our community and in particular for Merry Main Street. Some other notable highlights. Thank you, Mayor, for acknowledging at the top of the meeting why we are all in blue for autism awareness. Certainly our department is a really big partner in that partnership with Visit Mesa to make sure that we are an autism certified city. You can see that last year, over 80% of our community facing staff did renew their training. Some of the other departments that do participate in that as well is our police department, our libraries department, arts and culture, but we have the most employees through our Parks and Rec department, particularly because our adaptive arm is such a significant facilitator of those activities in the city. We have a lot of construction happening, particularly in Vice Mayor Summers' area, neck of the woods. We, with our capital-driven projects, as you'll hear more about in April 16th, in that presentation. But what I wanted to note is just the department's continual innovation and the way that they look at the landscape of different amenities across all of the various parks, and how as we continue to plan these new projects, we are also wanting to hear from the community what their interests and needs are, their evolving recreation interests. And so we will be, by the end of this year, adding then the new elements of a BMX bike park and an RC car track. And so we certainly look forward to more in the future. Additionally, last year was the launch of the MORE vehicle, the Mobile Outdoor Recreation Experience. This was really in partnership with the Fun and Fitness Van. You know, that is the mobile tool that goes to some of our parks to help activate those spaces and ensure that we are having the type of recreation that our community wants to see occurring in those different parks. The more is just an extension of that, giving us the ability to touch more of those parks. And then lastly, what I think is truly the gem of the department is really our day-to-day operations. We are the stewards of more than 5 rec centers, 4 fishing lakes, 9 aquatic facilities, 3 dog parks, convention center, amphitheater post, tennis and pickleball center, golf course. The list can go on, a cemetery. But you see there,
That's a nice one to add.
it is very important. So we have such an amazing crew there. And then you can see over 209 city parks and basins that we maintain, over 2,000 acres of parkland across the city. This is no small feat, and I certainly just want to acknowledge the department at large and the countless employees that have to touch all of these different facilities to maintain the quality that we are very proud of to see across our city. So moving on, just circling back to the discussion of the KPIs, again, many departments, kudos to our Office of Innovation and Efficiency once again. They were recently developed, not even a year ago. It's been about 9 months, and the work that they've really done to support the departments in ensuring that those metrics are shaped in a way that is meaningful for council. We've definitely heard that direction from you all in terms of how you would like to be able to see metrics and in a more outcome-based measure. Our department is still going through the process of reworking these metrics. So I look forward, and maybe a new director in the seat will look forward to being able to share those a little bit more in detail of how we're going to be building these out. But we are moving to an index model for all 3 of these outcome areas. So again, for the safe and welcoming environments, that will be more from our maintenance side, looking at those KPIs that will include features such as water usage, our speed in which we are responding to different service requests, our meeting of those criteria, those national standards for maintenance, and et cetera. For our impactful events, this is really going to be, once again, from our commercial side, from our convention center, the post, the golf course. How are we making sure that if we have contracts in those areas, are we fulfilling the desired goal from the city? And then for those that we control, are we meeting things like cost recovery goals, making sure that we're filling the spaces? It also includes special events, so these are also going to include things like attendance rates at our events. And then lastly, dynamic experiences is what we see under our recreation arm. That is going to be our adaptive programs, our youth and adult sports programs, our recreation centers, and so it's going to incorporate an index of different meaningful touch points to make sure those programs are successful. And so then what I do want to touch on just is some commitments from the department at large. These have been tried and true in terms of we're here to exist to provide the community with safe places to gather and to recreate. And so we will continue with that philosophy. We, of course, will be fiscally transparent and responsible, as council has certainly identified for all departments ahead. And then we will continue to provide that high quality programs for those that are here to spend time in Mesa. So what I did want to take a moment to be able to outline is the department's cost recovery and subsidy plan. This is really how we look at when we're making any sort of financial decisions, whether it's within our fees and charges, setting different rates, or whether it's in setting how we are looking at our expenses across the department. This is really the baseline plan that all of those different features are heading towards. So to break it down to you, everything that we do in our department can be bucketed in one of these 1 through 5 service levels. Level 1 is what we consider our baseline service. This is what we feel, what council has helped provide direction for in the past, as the things that we want to, at minimum, provide and make accessible to all across our city. And for that, these are city-funded efforts that we are not expecting or setting a cost recovery goal. This is things like making sure that our parks, our open spaces are available for anyone to attend. We're maintaining them, we're cutting the grass, we're watering the grass. We are making sure that the trails and the trash is picked up and cleared. We are making volunteer abilities available. We are making our accessibility of those facilities available. And so all of those type of baseline elements to make sure that we can open doors and make sure that those recreation spaces are available. As we move further along, level 2 is what we then consider those that are more of a benefit to our community. However, we want to also have a nominal cost recovery goal within that 20 to 30%. So you can see that that is where we're starting to provide things like our open gym at Eagles Recreation Center, public swim availability at our pools, drop-in court access at our parks. Things that, again, are really intended for the mass of the public to be able to have access to. However, are things that do require more hands-on touch point for staff to maintain. And so therefore, we're trying to start to instill some of those cost recovery items so that way we can modify some of those staffing costs. As we move into level 3 and 4, this is where we're really starting to get into a lot more of our courses that either we directly offer. Those are primarily of what you'll start seeing in level 3. Level 4 is where we're going to have those partnerships with those nonprofit or for-profit groups. So level 3, you can itemize as our adaptive program services, our youth sports that are run by the city, swim lessons. We want to ensure that we do make it available at a lower cost for the public to learn how to swim. After school programs, summer camps. So you can see again that 30 to 50% cost recovery is where we're looking and setting the price of those programs. As staffing costs increases, as different maybe program costs increases, that's where then it will have that impact into how we're raising rates within those fees and charges that you had already approved previous months or previous meetings ago. But this is again the philosophy in which we're looking at. Level 4 is, again, noted with those interest groups, our affiliated partnerships. But again, mostly these are then going to be those for-profit sports teams or recreation teams that are coming now and renting our facilities to be able to host their events. So I know that this is an area where council may hear a lot from the public in terms of when we do raise our rates in those partnerships. But you can see there that typically our cost recovery goals, now this chart does indicate 50 to 100%. I would want to notate for council's interest that we are really truly hovering closer to that 50% on the cost recovery of those items. It is within our adult sports programs that the city hosts that we are looking for that 100% cost recovery because that is the staff time that goes into hosting these events. Out of all of these cost recovery goals, this is not covering the maintenance or utilities. This is truly, again, the O&M that goes into maintaining the hosting of the site through staffing and the different resources needed to that. Level 5 is the last category. This is where there's only an individual benefit. This is where our convention center, those ticketed priced events, this is where we're having Ramada rentals and those things that are private in use.
Can you tell me where the cost recovery goal percentages were obtained? When did we have that discussion? Or was that Parks and Rec, or is that standard?
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, for that question. And so this particular chart has been part of the Parks Master Plan process, and I know that this has been in effect for several master plan processes. I believe Mr. Hirschberg is also one of the original authors of bringing this model to the city. To the best of
He's
my
denying it right now. He said I had nothing to do with it.
to the best of my knowledge, this has been part of council past budget discussions year after year. So certainly this is an opportunity. The Parks Master Plan continues to 2027. So we do anticipate that beginning next year, the new director in place is really going to have to take on the task of deep diving into a new Parks Master Planning process, in which this certainly can be a continued conversation with council.
Yeah, it'd probably be good to review this, even if we decide that this is the level we want to maintain. Also, I would put it through the Parks Board and let them chew on that as that process goes on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor Summers. I will make note now, because I don't want to forget it at the end. This is certainly something, this presentation at large, we did go through with the Parks Advisory Board just several weeks ago, so they were given this same presentation. However, this chart in particular was reviewed with them in addition in the fall time when they had extensively gone through the fees and charges process.
Good. I like that we're using our boards like that. I
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Thank you. We did hear that feedback from council to make sure we were making those touch points.
And we know, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, Mr. Reddy, and then.
Thank you. Mayor, I'd just add to that, we do try to use, we know that this is when you hear from residents. Sometimes if rentals go up, we get it when club sports or other sports teams are renting our fields and taking advantage of that. This has been the guiding principle that staff has utilized when we look at the cost recovery about that. So you're right, Vice Mayor, it's a living document. It's certainly up to your discretion as council, but we just wanted to give you the perspective of this is how staff looks each year. And certainly as costs rise to maintain those fields, to provide those services, then we have to pass those costs on in conformance with this philosophy. And sometimes that's not easy. I had 2 kids in club sports. I know what it costs and to do that. But we also have to be fair to all users of our facilities. And so you're right. This is a good thing to reevaluate, to send through our Parks Board, to look at, of course, as we always do, as we update the Parks Master Plan, of looking at this. But just want to give council that perspective of this is the lens by which staff, when they make those recommendations each year, they're using this model.
They could make changes to it based on the market. They could leave it the same based on the market. That's fine. But the Parks Board would have an opportunity to do a deeper dive on this, where, I just need to know what the justification is for saying it, so it's a good use.
Mr. Heredia.
I think just a quick question on this slide. Does the service level kind of trend into the amount of resources we spend via those service levels? Like, for instance, service level 1, I think maybe that's the most cost that we have at the parks side. So just thinking of like another column in my head as far as the amount of budgetary piece that it costs to have these service levels, or the amount of resources that it takes to kind of work on these service levels types. That makes sense?
Yes, no, thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Heredia. Thank you for that input. I think that's certainly something that we can look at with a future lens. But certainly why I wanted to bring this at the top of the discussion, because once we go into the department's budget breakdown, I think what you're alluding to is true in that the highest cost for the department, our parks maintenance budget, is really in that level 1 category, which is where, as that continues to increase, our availability to do then the remaining is certainly where we're making impacts when we're having to do things like reduction cuts. Yes.
Ms. Taylor.
And you can delay this for a later part of the presentation, but if you would not mind, when you're going through it, do you remember, I think it's Brimhall that's closing, is that right?
Correct.
Fremont. Thank you. I don't want to say the wrong one because I might get a lot of emails after that. Fremont. do you mind explaining for the general public to hear why we're not just taking the costs that we would have allocated towards Fremont and that's covering all the costs of the increased fees? Because I know we talked about that when we met and you did a great job at breaking it down and saying like, it doesn't really flow in because we have 2 new, I think, aquatic centers that we're also opening. So it's like it gets absorbed super quickly. Am I explaining this in a way that makes sense?
I will
If I'm
certainly
not, I
do
will
my
try.
best.
Yeah,
Yes.
you know, when we were discussing it, you were like, well, it doesn't just immediately cover the cost of all the fees, and here's why. I know that we also talked about some of these being, we're just passing along the cost that's incurred to us from the, you know, the people that we have to have work at our aquatic centers while we have all of these third-party operators coming in and using them, so.
Correct, yes.
I've received a lot of emails.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Taylor. I do recall now the portion of the conversation,
Yes.
and yes,
I'm sure
I
you've had a
will-
lot of them. I'm sorry.
We will be coming in a couple of slides and speaking about Fremont, and I'll
Sweet.
make sure to
Okay.
add that in.
Thank you,
Yes.
thank you.
All right, Mayor. So I wanted to, again, just in part of doing our due diligence, and so certainly as we're not having those robust index outcome-based KPIs available for you today, just wanted to show a couple of touch point metrics that really what I viewpoint as, you know, showing some of the great impact that we have in our community. So within our attendance and rentals, this is excluding those within our pools, but this is looking at our park fields, our sport complex, the tennis and pickleball court, open spaces, ramadas, those types of services. You can see that there was a decline in the actual rentals that occurred between 2024 and 25. That was really because a lot of our outside rental facilities are in the outdoor space, and we did actually have more rain days last year than we did in 2024 that impacted just the need to make those reservations. However, you can see that we still had a great attendance rate across those, and I can also confidently say that we had made the same in revenues of those. So rentals do not necessarily equate, you know, revenue and nor attendance. And so that's kind of the dynamic of what we hope to be able to further paint a picture of in a more dynamic KPI moving forward. You see the big jump between 22 and 23. That was still, in 2022, our recreation partners, those affiliate groups, were really still coming out of those post-COVID business, you know, ramping up their businesses a lot more. And so that's where you can start to see our trending within 2023 start to stabilize of how many participants we really have coming across our facilities. Moving along within our program participants, so a lot of what we host as a city are going to be within our tri-centers, which is Webster, Eagles, and Jefferson Recreation Centers. This is going to be the youth programs that we offer, and then our adaptive teams. What I wanted to be able to highlight within this particular chart is that you can see the trending line of how our team is really continuing to exemplify the program participants that are coming through. We're not in a slow demand era yet. We are truly pressing on our staff to be innovative with the different staffing models and by encouraging them to fill the capacity of the offerings that we do have, which is why we've been able to see this continual increase of program participants coming through our doors without having any increases in our staffing. In fact, the past several years with our budget proposals and what you will see with our budget proposals has actually been to decrease our staffing amount, but we do not anticipate a negative impact to these program participant numbers. We do see a flatlining, I think, as you know, council is looking to expect across all of our budget capacities, but we're very encouraged by the numbering trends that we've been able to see. And then the last chart that I wanted to put before you is our citywide direct cost recovery for facilities. The department ourselves have reached our department cost recovery goals for the facilities. When we add in the citywide input, and that's really going to be then now that the facilities maintenance team is separate, and then some of those additional contracts that we use to to pay for the maintenance of those. It does decrease the cost recovery of the facility at large slightly. However, it is still in keeping with the essence of that cost recovery model that I had showed you. So Webster, Eagles, The Post, Jefferson, those are all those base 2, service level 2, where we're looking for that 20 to 30% cost recovery. Red Mountain Center has a lot more of the more special interest or higher cost recovery programs within it, as the tennis and pickleball. So that's where we're looking for that 50% marker. And then the convention center and amphitheater and cemetery are those individual benefit service 5 line item where we were looking for that 100% cost recovery. So now we're going to go ahead and jump into our department's financial summary. Councilmember Heredia, speaking to what your recommendation was in that chart before, this will help hopefully shape and bring this all together with that cost recovery model. For the line items, you will see the commercial line item. This is our convention center, the amphitheater, and the cemetery. So these are our 100% cost recovery line item models. You can see based on the varying years, when you're looking at the expenditures versus the revenues, whether it was in the year-end actuals from 24 to 25, or where we estimate our year-end today, the difference of this amount really comes down to our convention center not operating on a traditional fiscal year model. When they book out shows, the way that they book out shows and then have to make the payments back, or vice versa, whether we're making deposits of those extend across fiscal year lines. However, again, the program itself, our department has been relatively able to meet from the booking end the 100% cost recovery model. As you saw on that later slide, it's the facility cost where the city is seeing the pressures, in which we are currently in search for a private-public partnership through the RFP process. It is the enhancements, it's the cost of the facility and the future costs of the facility that are really driving it. But I want to give kudos to the Mesa Convention Center and Amphitheater team that they have really been able to keep that 100% cost recovery goals within their booking and their ability to activate those centers. And then again, our cemetery team does not get enough credit as well. So they certainly extend above and beyond. As we move further along into the lines, the recreation line item, this one is where we are primarily general fund. So when, the city manager is coming to the department asking us to make those 2% budget reductions, this is why it goes into those areas where it hurts the most, where the public is maybe able to see that impact the most, because it's through that recreation line item that we are general funded. And so it's a much slimmer budget then to make that wiggle room impact, which again, we will discuss then in those subsequent slides, and why, again, it has that bigger feel. What we can note here, again, with the 25-26 year-end estimate, we do anticipate coming in at about that 35% cost recovery mark. So again, keeping in line with our cost recovery models at large, it puts us in that middle tier. Our 24-25 year-end actuals and revenues put us at a 42% cost recovery, and that's also what we're anticipating with our proposed budget for next year. So we are certainly doing our best in terms of continually pulling all the different levers with our fees and charges, looking at our offerings, and ensuring that we are, again, attributing that back to a philosophy that the department has laid out from previous years prior. And then lastly, resource management. This is the highest line item of our budget, and this is our park maintenance costs. And so to Councilmember Heredia's point earlier, this is that tier 1, base 1 line item, where this is where we're gonna have continual increases to our budget within utility costs, watering, mowing the lawn, and having those extended pressures. However, these are the baseline items to keep those facilities and those amenities and are, quite frankly, city investment available to all. You will see that there are some revenues attributed to that, and that is really from the due diligence and kudos to this department to explore then those opportunities, whether it's for grants, such as, getting those CDBG funded parks, or other sort of grant funded opportunities. It also can be in property damage reimbursements. So when we do have significant storms, when it does take out and have impacts like damaging and the removal of trees are needed, things like that, we are then also able to get some property damage insurance reimbursement. We also have some nominal sponsorship opportunities across our department. And so that's where you're seeing that we are even making it an effort where we have no cost recovery goals to still try and bring that benefit to the city. Lastly, what I wanted to note is just kind of the remarks that Mr. Butler had made earlier on the citywide, ability to have that $55 million cost savings across those 3 years. You can see our total expenditures, our proposed budget for 2026-27 is $55 million. This is truly the impact of that savings is the entire capabilities and operations of our Parks and Rec Department budget.
Question?
So you said resource management is primarily our facilities?
Our parks maintenance, I apologize, parks maintenance, our department's O&M.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I was gonna say, like, where's personnel in there? That's, okay.
Yeah, that's all.
So, you might have said this, but, so talk to me about, so recreation is going down a little bit. I mean, we're decreasing some programming, right, and services, but.
Jump into, yeah.
Oh, okay, we haven't gotten
Yes.
into that? Sorry, okay, maybe I'll wait for my question, because I'm kind of thinking, well, if we're decreasing that, why is resource management not decreasing? If you could just address that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Goforth. So to state it, and I know I'm trying to also breeze through it a little more quickly, to say it once again, resource management is where we're not having the ability, or where we're making the decision as the department, and certainly the city manager agrees, those would have those very apparent impacts. If we pull back from park maintenance staff or the resources allocated to there, you are quickly going to see the yellowing of grass. You're going to see unsafe parks equipment or the closing off of parks equipment. Those impacts that would truly affect the greater population in which we feel was that tier 1 level of service. The reason that we're having to make the significant cuts within the recreation area is because that is our, what we consider general funded arm of the services, in which then are going to be falling into those tier 2 or tier 3, which are not open to, we try and make them available to the public, but not all of the public touches those particular activities. And so it is a pulling of levers. We will be proposing our 2% reductions and going over those shortly so that you'll be able to see where those impacts are. What I do want to also note in the recreation line item, the reason that there is a more significant decrease from 25-26 to 26-27, the park rangers budget was within there. That, no?
No, they were in resource management.
They were in resource management. Okay, I apologize. This is why I have the financial expert. We did have the removal from the Parks Rangers and the Fremont operations that were removed out of the 25-26 to 26-27 ongoing budgets. So we'll break that a little bit further down as we get into the next slide.
Yeah, because the services and the programming wasn't necessarily cut, because it was just transferred to other facilities, right?
Correct. But the O&M, the maintenance, the ability to, the chemical costs, the costs for maintaining the facility, that was already removed from the budget per council's direction last budget discussion.
And I understand, you still have to maintain, and, you don't want just because you maybe have either decreased service or somehow, I don't want to say decrease necessarily, but emphasize more cost recovery programming, you still have to maintain the facilities. My only issue is if we're going to be doing cost savings by reducing service programming for our residents, I would like to see the savings also internally, the internal expense with that. I guess what I'm saying is I don't want us to prioritize keeping staff over providing programming to our residents. And I understand that's a bit delicate and sensitive, but
Oh, no, and I think you'll see what they have prioritized is right-sizing staff to meet the demands on the recreation side. The one philosophical thing, as you mentioned on resource management, again, that is the upkeep of our parks citywide, which has been a priority, right? That
Yes,
sometimes
for sure.
programming, we can adjust year to year, we can make those different decisions, not to say that doesn't have impact, but we can pull those levers. What we wanted to have is a, well-kept, well-maintained park system that benefits all of our residents throughout the city. And so that's why you haven't seen that at the expense of the resource management side, even though you obviously see increases in that. It costs more to have someone to maintain a park. That person costs more to do it, but we need the grass to be mowed. We need the swing set to be functional. We need that so that people have that open space to recreate and have a well-maintained park where they feel safe and that they want to frequent. And that's why that has always been the prioritization, to make sure that those are well-maintained. And then we've obviously had to expand and retract some of our recreational programming as resources allow.
I think that's the right approach, for sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, thank you, and Mayor, Councilmember Goforth, and thank you, Mr. City Manager, for providing the appropriate response. But I think this is actually going to be a perfect segue into what we're going to get into right now with our proposed budget reductions. So the reductions, the 2% reductions for our department equates to just over $942,000. And so again, as you had seen with those different line items, we are proposing those from the general fund line items. It doesn't necessarily make sense to make those within the commercial line items when we have 100% cost recovery goals, or as mentioned within the park maintenance. Where we will begin with our reductions are going to be within 3 currently vacant full-time positions. We have a recreation specialist within our athletics unit. We have a recreation programmer within our recreation unit. And then within parks maintenance, we do have a trades worker 1 position. All 3 of those positions have been currently left vacant. And so in the interim, the staff and the units have been able to absorb those positions, the duties of those positions across their teams, in which they feel confident in being able to continue that without having any significant impact, again, whether it's from the public-facing side or an internal burden. We have done that internal assessment. Certainly the department, we have a lot of revolving positions, so this is only, and in which we're doing that internal assessment, where we're evaluating each position. So these 3 positions were definitely assessed in terms of that need to continue.
How many full-time employees does the Parks Department have?
Oh, you're gonna 240, I think.
Okay, so
Sorry,
I
I know
just
our
kinda
full number.
trying to
so-
get a sense
Thank
of
you.
what is 3
Yeah.
in the big scheme of things here.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's a lot. And then that's not even counting all the part-time.
Correct,
revolving-
yes.
Correct.
Yes, our part-time is we have 150 FTE equivalents in our part-time, right? Because we count them a little differently.
At the height, we had about 700 part-time staff.
Yeah.
What was the height?
Like at our peak season.
At our peak season. Summer.
That's like turn that on. Is that like lifeguards that are part-time and things like that?
All
Correct.
across, yeah.
So Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Goforth Taylor. Yes, so the way that our department operates, thank you, Allison, for notating. So and we do have a lot of fluctuation of positions within our department in terms of just the kind of coming and going, and luckily promotions within internal staff. So we average over 200 full-time, around the 240 full-time positions. But then the department is really truly those that are impacting our community are in large part from the part-time non-benefited staff, in which we'll get to within our next position reductions proposal. That really can go up to that 700 mark when it is the summer season primarily, or peak season for those types of programs. So starting in the springtime with our springtime activities through the summertime is when we're going to have the bulk of those positions. For every one FTE, this is, I know it's a little bit non-traditional in how our department counts that, trying to fit it into the citywide model. One FTE, so that equivalent to a full-time position, you could have anywhere from 5 to 10 people filling those 2,080 hours of an FTE position. So that's why there is that fluctuation in the number count, where some years you may be on the lower end and in the 600s, and other years you may be up to 800. It's just the availability of those different individuals and how many hours they want to take on. But yes, that's going to be the positions such as the lifeguards, those that are, opening the doors for the pools. That can be the ones leading the basketball coach team, and all the different offerings that you primarily see out. So that leads into
Andrea, sorry, I have one quick
yes,
question.
absolutely.
You know how we talked about how at our aquatic centers, we have a lot of these outside entities, these businesses that come in and they offer competitive swim and whatnot. Do any of them bring in their own lifeguards or their own? No, we provide that service for them. They just come in and they're like, this is the coach. You pay for them to teach you how to be an Olympic swimmer.
Correct, yes. Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Taylor. That is a very great question. So the fees and charges, that cost recovery model, if we go back to the cost, let me double fact check myself. That's where we're looking for that 50 to 100%. I would generally say right now, when we last looked, we're probably more in that 60 to 70% of what we're actually cost recovering through our fees and charges to those for-profit entities, that they are paying only strictly for the staffing cost. So that is not the maintenance of the facilities cost, that is only trying to subsidize the staffing cost, and that is primarily of the part-time non-benefited staff that is there to be available for those facilities. So that's why it is a pressure point for the public, but why we're continually trying to assess as well how we are positioning those part-time non-benefited staff to make sure it's as efficient and effective for us citywide, but also to make sure that it is meeting the needs of those particular groups. So for example, for us to have the level of quality of to be able to have those nationally recognized aquatic complexes, we have to have a minimum of 3 lifeguards available at the poolside to even open the doors. And so that's where our costs begin to quickly accumulate.
And can we accept a third-party lifeguard that would come with one of those outside vendors that's looking to operate within one of our aquatic centers? Or is there like a standard that the city has to have their own? I don't even know if they'd offer to do that, by the way. They might be like, no, we're not coming anymore because you don't have the lifeguard.
So Mayor, Councilmember Taylor, certainly our ability, we are not paying benefited costs for these part-time non-benefited employees. It's not coming with the package of costs that an employee or staff would normally have for the city.
So we're on the low
So
tier
this
anyway.
is essentially the contract mechanism where we're able to ensure the appropriate certification and safety and training that we had been awarded.
Which avoids a
such
lot of
recognition
liability,
for.
right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Just kind of was thinking.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
Mayor and Councilmember Taylor, I mean, there's those concerns, but I think in reality, let's be honest, these are, in many cases, for-profit commercial activities. They're trying to keep as low of an overhead as possible. So I don't think many are beating down our door. We're trying to offer to bring, additional staffing to do that. And so they rely on us, and we provide the facilities, we provide the staffing, and then they have access to that. And that's where the cost recovery comes in. And again, going back to that, sometimes when your emails, start to light up from people, and I think sometimes
They don't
those.
realize they're paying it through the entity, yeah.
Yeah, those games are played because a lot of times it's the end user, it's the parent, right, who then absorbs that cost because it's passed on to the parent by the club or whatever entity is doing it. But that's the spirit by which those increases occur, is to try to maintain that cost recovery. And it's not always easy in that
Which, now
regard.
that I'm saying this out loud, they would just pass on the cost of their lifeguard to the parent.
They would. they
So
would,
there's a
yeah.
pipe dream, never
Yeah.
mind. Thanks for letting me walk through that.
Well, to that point, there's a high level of liability with this programming, and so it's important that we control the training, certification, we have everything in play to help, keep the costs we're keeping the costs as low as possible, and then again, they're a non-benefited employee contractually, and it helps them in their life progress. Hey, I was a lifeguard once for for the city of Mesa. So there's a cost benefit to that.
Yes, thank you. And just the final note on that as well is certainly we want to maximize our facilities as much as possible. So we want to have those partnerships with those groups that are coming in and utilizing our pools, because otherwise they would just be open for public swim and some of these other activities then that we would have to host. So there's definitely still a city benefit within that. So moving along then, within the part-time non-benefited hours, you can see that we have the proposal for 7.24. I know that's not an arm and a limb of a person. That is, again, going back to then the hours that we have available. This equates to approximately 15,000 hours. However, this is less than 5% of the availability of part-time non-benefited hours that we utilize across our department. So we have over 100 different lines of programming within our department. We asked all of those different areas to make minor tweaks and to really look at, and I think this was the challenge that Mayor and Council had proposed to the department in past years, really look at how can we be innovative, how can we right-size the availability of our staffing hours and make sure that we have we feel confident that we're going to have no impact to the programming. We're not reducing programming. We are not proposing any sort of reductions that we feel will be felt by the public. This is just maybe shifting some things, like rather than having 3 people come in at one time, you're maybe alternating some schedules a little bit more so that there's coverage in other ways. And this was stretched across all of the many different lines, hundreds of programming that we offer, where it's just minor tweaks. So we feel confident moving forward with that. As was mentioned then by Councilmember Taylor, the closing of Fremont Aquatic Complex was something that we had broached with all of the council, and the city did move forward in that we are not going to be offering any summer programming at Fremont Aquatic Complex and decommissioning the facility after May 23rd. With this, council had directed, this was part of the discussions that was proposed to council last year. And during that discussion, council had made the recommendation to move forward with opening for summer, but then the O&M, the ongoing O&M was already removed, knowing that this would be the last summer for this aquatic complex. Given that we are not going to be moving forward with the summer programming, we still had in our department's ongoing budget the 3.5 FTE. So this is, again, not full-time bodies. This was not permanent staff. This was in the part-time non-benefited hours for the lifeguards, for the additional staffing that goes to operate that facility. In our ongoing budget, that we were able to make this as part of our reductions. And it is the nearby aquatic complexes of Shepherd, Brimhall, and Stapley that we did feel confident that we were able to redirect then those affiliated groups that we have partnerships for classes. We were able to move them to the available lanes at those 3 complexes. And then the public swim is where there would have been an impact to the public. However, it was 2024, we had just over 1,100 individuals, and this could have been reoccurring individuals, this was usage, coming for the public swim. That decreased last year to only 711. that participated in the public swim at Fremont. So certainly you can see how that justification for the FTE did not offset those that were coming for the open public swim when we were able to absorb all of the other classes or program participants in those other 3 nearby complexes. To Councilmember Taylor's question earlier, we were not able to redirect that savings into other ways because it would not have had an impact on, the O&M or maintenance costs that would have offset maybe those felt by those private groups. All right, last one, we're almost there. All right, so then we did have some nominal savings within our our operation and maintenance budget.
What's the score?
You can see that there was some program savings within our adaptive services. I did want to note with reducing excursions from summer camps, we do offer summer camp programming, which individuals sign up on a weekly basis. We did have within those programming budgets, not every week, on occasional weeks, where they would bus the kids to different locations, whether it was even going to like the Science Center in Phoenix or some outside locations. The cost for buses is very expensive now, as well as the safety and liability of transporting children these days. Also, we want to encourage, now that we have such a city investment in these recreational vehicles, including our own Fun and Fit and more, but now we have the Reed Runner, we have ACM&H with their vehicle, we're able to have a more equitable model across all of those different weeks, have a more safe model by ensuring that now we're bringing a lot more of those activities to the summer camps rather than, quite frankly, the very big cost of paying for buses. And that was through the schools that we did have a significant discount on the buses, but even then we know there's a need for bus drivers in the school systems. It's a very high cost still. We fully confident that our summer camp experience will be just as fruitful as it always has been. We also did not eliminate each week in those summer camps. The kiddos are taken to the aquatic complexes for swimming. That has not been removed. So where we can have MESA location and excursions, we will continue to do that. And then lastly, what we wanted to discuss with you is the proposed elimination of the Spring Celebrate Mesa. Again, this was up for discussion last year, but we do feel confident in moving forward with this as another budget reduction. The city hosts 2 Celebrate Mesa events. As you all know, we have one coming up in just a couple of weeks on April 11th. This is the city's intended way to be able to engage with the community, be able to showcase all of the different departments and resources. It does attract a lot of viewership in terms of the spring Celebrate Mesas generally hover between the 5,000 to 7,000 mark. Our fall Celebrate Mesa is much higher, between 8,000 to 10,000 participants. So this is why we had made the recommendation to eliminate the spring, as we also know that there are other downtown-related springtime city events. We just had the Cyclo Mesa event. There's other offerings at Pioneer Park. So we do feel that there is more of a presence of citywide events in the downtown region, whereas Red Mountain in the fall is certainly an area that continues to see a lot of activation when we host the Fall Celebrate Mesa. You can see that the savings, the $36,000, is the direct cost. What is not included in here, where we feel is actually going to be a bigger impact, is that this is truly a really big undertaking for our department specifically to post on, and then for the departments that are participating in the event. The staffing cost, the indirect staffing cost, is quite large. So that savings is where we feel that there's going to be a greater impact. I can say at least 500 of those part-time non-benefited hours that we proposed on the reduction in the slide before is attributed to specifically just to the Celebrate Mesa event. Additionally, the week before, it's an all hands on deck for our full-time staff. So that's where I say we can really reutilize the staffing in a more effective way in maintaining our day-to-day operations.
So Mayor,
Mr.
Council,
Butler.
we don't take that lightly, but as Andrea mentioned, it's really the overall activation that we see with different programming, both at Pioneer and in downtown over the spring, that still allows a lot of public engagement and public opportunity that, so we're not eliminating a program without the notion that there's still a lot of spring activation that occurs in and around this area. So it's a tough decision. We wish we wouldn't have to do it, but just looking at attendance numbers and just prioritization, we realize that the fall event is definitely, we get a little bit more bang for our buck, and there's not those other activations that occur at out east that compensate for the loss of this facility in the spring, so.
I would just make a comment that I would agree. My mantra is always quality over quantity, and I would rather see less events and more attendance at each event than, and I understand why we tried to get on both sides of the city, but I think sometimes we have more events, less attendance, and I would rather see less events and more attendance. So I think this is in line with that, so I appreciate it. Thank you. And it's staying at Red Mountain, so.
So Mayor, bringing it all home again, just to notate that our department's 2% budget reductions comes to that just over $942,000. You can see that based off of our proposal and the city manager's support, it is the removal of the 3 vacant positions, the part-time non-benefited hours from both Fremont Pool and across our programming, and then some O&M attributed from those other events in the Spring Celebrate Mesa. So with that, we are not touching any, again, our full commitment that we are not going to have any significant impact to any programming that benefits the community from a programmatic standpoint. And we are also able to confidently assure that we're able to keep our full-time staff in the positions that they currently have. So with that, happy to answer any final questions.
I'll just add that, you know, I think last year we got asked about fee increases, dollar amounts for all the different programming. Not that it was confusing, but there was a lot to discuss there. And I know there was a lot of thoughts about, you know, so we're not dealing with that this year. I like that.
Correct.
You can do that internally, I think, if you need to on the cost recovery aspect. One thing I'd just like you to consider is, I know that there's some outreach on baseball, Little League rental for the fields. And some of the baseball leagues, Little League Baseball needs an hour and a half versus a 3-hour field rental. And so maybe they were asked, well, could we combine it with another Little League team to get to the 3-hour threshold? They were told, no, you have to take the whole 3 hours. Just keep that in mind. Maybe there's some flexibility there. And then I like the being strategic on the cost recovery component and keep us abreast on that. So, I mean, that's all that I have, you know, paying attention to detail. And, you know, these are one of the services that people that see what Mesa does and outreach, our parks programming, our recreational, it's incredible. But it's cost sharing too. We have to have people cost share into the program to help things keep going, especially during this time. So thank you for your input, Mr. Butler. Mr. Smith, anything you want to add to?
No. Thank you, Mayor, Council. Again, I just want to compliment Andrea and the entire executive team. She's got, as she alluded to, she's got a great team. Mayor, you touched on this, but it's really important to highlight. This is, I feel like, a night and day discussion than the one that Council was faced with this time about 12 months ago. And
yeah, thank you.
And it's kudos to this executive team, though, that got creative. They found ways to continue, as many of our departments do, to do more with less, than to be able to continue with the vast majority of the programming and not have to come up with the cuts on the back of that. And so I'm very appreciative to this team for their creativity and the way that they did this. And I think it positions our programming in a much better discussion and light than what the council was faced with last year. So thank you for that.
I do have one question. Sorry, I should have checked my notes first. So your total budget on slide 9 is the difference between the expenditures and the revenues, and that would be your budget net, right?
Can you go back to slide 9?
I'm trying, sorry. There it goes.
Okay, I apologize. Can you please repeat the question?
So what is your total net budget? Is it just the 55.1 minus the 17.9?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if there's
Yeah.
any other figures or numbers involved that we'll see in the final budget.
Correct.
Okay.
You're
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Mayor and Councilmember Duff, so just to be clear, when we say the budget, it'll be the authorization, so that would be the 55.1. But yes, you're correct, the net impact on the budget would be the difference between those two numbers.
Yeah, so
Does that
we
make
so we
sense?
budget the full amount.
You budget the full expenditures, that's your authorized budget capacity. That would be included in Brian's overall budget, would be the 55.1.
Correct. And then we'll generate.
And then the net impact to our financials would be the difference.
Which is reflected in the sources and uses, so that is our estimate for what our revenue would be, but of course, we allocate that total expenditure that we will go out and spend $55.1 million on Parks and Rec this coming fiscal year.
And then we'll recover 17.9, well, 17.7, whatever it is.
Correct,
Correct,
Mayor.
ma'am.
So just, this is really, think about this department budget as a small version of what Brian produced for the citywide,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Where you have your total expenditures and then your total anticipated revenues. So same situation here.
Okay, great.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you. I was a public park kid. I went to the public pool all the time when I was little, and I have a personal bias that it creates a very positive impact in the lives of a lot of families. We did not have a pool. I didn't come from a house where we had, a giant backyard where we could have one. And so I made a lot of friends. My mom made a lot of friends, and I saw those people every week. And I think we often forget there are many, many families who enjoy these services that the city offers, and it brings them together where they otherwise may not have had that opportunity. And not everyone lives in a neighborhood with a community pool either. So those are big impacts in lives of children and their parents. So thank you for doing all the work that you've done and taking good care of our Parks and Rec.
All right, ladies, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move over to item 3 to acknowledge the receipt of minutes. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Thank you. Ms. Duff, Vice Mayor, all in favor say aye. Aye. Next is current events and conferences attended. Do you want to dispense with that, council? Okay,
So moved.
saying yes, we're going to move away from conferences attended. We'll do it next time. Mr. Butler, your turn. Schedule of future meetings.
Don't throw anything at me because I'm going to talk about our next budget discussion. So we will convene on Monday at 4:45 p.m. will be an earlier start time for study session because we'll have the Transportation Department presenting on the transportation budget for the coming fiscal year. So Monday, April 6th, 4:45 p.m., and then we'll be followed by our normal scheduled council meeting at 5:45 after that. Mayor, I would just note too, speaking of our Spring Celebrate Mesa, probably bad timing on that, but Saturday, April the 11th is our Spring Celebrate Mesa here at Pioneer Park. So this is a free family activity. So please come out and celebrate on Saturday, April the 11th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Also, I'm sure this will be mentioned during the transportation presentation on Monday, but the city's Bike to Work Day is on Wednesday, April the 15th from 7 to 9 a.m. out here at the plaza at Mesa City Center. So our Mesa Moves is our annual Bike to Work Day and community celebration. that encourages everyone to swap their 4 wheels for 2. So that will be, yeah. And I'll just close on, Brian mentioned this earlier, but there's a little event happening on Thursday, April the 23rd, that the State of the City. The mayor might be a little bit busy preparing for that, and that will be at the Mesa Convention Center on Thursday, April the 23rd. So look forward to that, Mayor.
Very smart. Can I raise one question here? This is a little unrelated, but I was looking at it. The comments that come into the council, specifically on budget, who answers those?
Yeah, so Holly's team collects that, and then those are coordinated with OMB on who is the appropriate entity.
Respond.
Yeah, response.
Okay, because we get them and we review them, which I think is great, the council, but I just want to make sure they're being responded.
They are, if they're asking for a response. Sometimes it's more of a statement. And,
For sure.
And so those are passed on to you, but if it's something that there is a question and we can clarify, the respective departments and or OMB allocate that out.
Okay, great. It's a good question.
And also the mayor's office weighs in too. We do some of that as well. So it's a coordinated effect.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you get that list, and if you want to, you certainly can. But then staff will follow up as well if it's a more technical question that's handled, and we keep track of that to make sure that the questions are answered. Yeah.
Well, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ms. Duff. Ms. Taylor, all in favor say aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.